to have to register for an anti-bullying conference. So I'm very pleased I'm here and it's all working. Now, for the day, I'm just curious what it is that you might leave with that has been useful for you. Okay, so I've got a handout. I don't know if you were sent by Dawn, which I was sent, a list of your research interests, because that was really important for me to get on the inside and then to share those with you in terms of your own context and the actual inquiries and research interests that you have, because by the end of the day, I'm just hoping that you've got a sense of what participatory action research from a living theory perspective might offer you, okay, in terms of your inquiries. But it's rather like a difference between what we call a given curriculum. So you've got on bench there a handout, which is my given curriculum, which is given out to you. But what makes these workshops successful, I think, is your engagement in a way that we create a living curriculum so that your own learning does become the focus of the day. So you leave with both an understanding of, a better understanding of participatory action research, and it is a global movement, and I'll show you where you can access the resources from some of the major centres that have generated participatory action research around the world. And then, and it's just lucky that today we've got a journal called the Educational Journal of Living Theories, and it's just by chance that we've managed to be, the June issue was published today, so I've got that, you know, that I can just bring up. And I think some of those articles there, and you'll be able to get into from my website, Facebook, join in if you wish, to a living theory conversation, if you want to participate in it. But before I get underway and to show you, if you like, the given curriculum, I'm just curious in terms of your own reasons for coming here today. You've got your research interests. And what I'd like to do is just to give you just 5 minutes just to talk with a partner, just someone else, and just to share what it is that you're actually hoping to get, in particular, in relation to your values. Okay, so you will share because there's a list of all the research interests, all the contexts. But what nobody else, I think, at the moment will have a sense of are the values that are motivating you. And in a participatory process, it's actually sharing the values that are actually part of the meaning and purpose you give to your lives, and actually you can bring into your research inquiry, certainly from a participatory and a living theory perspective. Okay? And then I'll just get a sense from you about your values, because the very first conference that I went to was in 1977, and I made a mistake. I was a young researcher, and I'd done a lot of work on local curriculum development. And I attracted an audience of one, okay? And I started to talk at this guy, right? And I went on, because I was allowed 30 minutes. And after about 15 minutes, and I'd been talking at him for 15 minutes, he just asked me just to pause for a minute. He introduced himself. And he said, I'm Lawrence Stenhouse, and he was the international expert in the field. And he just said, look, Jack, let's go for a drink. And there's just one thing, perhaps you could develop a sense of audience. And since then, you know, I've really felt it important to get a sense of who you are and what your interests are, so I can respond to them. Now, can I ask, is John Conley here? Has he got John? No? Because John got his doctorate from here in terms of participatory action research, and I've given you the reference with the URL that you can actually get to, you know, from there, because I very much want for you to recognise that you've got people here that have actually done superb work in participatory action research in terms of that. So we try and build our knowledge from each other. So could you just spend, as I say, just 5 minutes, and it's literally just get a sense of the context, but also the vital thing, see if you can hear and understand something about the fundamental values that have brought you here. Why are you sustaining these kind of inquiries? And I have for years. Now, what is it that is motivating you? Because that will be really important to develop this participatory approach and living theory of your own practice. Okay, so will you just do that? Just in the other person. What have you picked up in terms of what I call a values base? Have you got any sense from just that brief conversation that you've got a bit on the inside of what is motivating the person you'll be talking with? Have you got any sense? Anybody? Don't all speak up.
I think for Ben it would be he's really motivated by past experience and by inclusion and human rights. He really has really strong beliefs around that. I think that's what's motivating.
And Ben, what about you? Did you pick up?
Very similar, I think, and kind of ensuring maybe people who historically haven't been heard, have voices are heard, those kind of things, and not doing things to people or for people without, you know.
Yeah, and it's those values that, if you like, can drive you to sustain your inquiry. The issues of the human rights in particular. Yeah. I'll mention something about inclusion. Any others that you picked up as you were just conversing about the values, because those will be really important throughout the whole day. Is there any other sense that you've got? That there is a passion there in the person that you're talking with that might help to explain why they're doing what they're doing, why have they sustained their inquiries? No?
A sense of care for the participants, from like the different participants in research here, but a sense of care for those people and that their views matter, and that change can happen as a result of that practice with them.
Care. So one of the doctoral students at the moment is looking at a living theory of caring. But I'd like to be just aware that the words that we use, okay, so I can use words like freedom, academic freedom, justice, care, the human dignity, yeah? So the words. And we've all got a facility to use those kinds of value words. But in participatory research and living theory research, there is a different meaning to the values. The values are embodied. So when you say about caring or care, it's not only your ability to use the words care, it's how are you actually living that embodied expression of care in your relationships with others and bring that into your research. So if you want to explain your influence, you will need to find a way of actually communicating, not just in the words, but through the embodied expressions. I hope you can, even as I'm speaking to you, you're enlivening me. The fact that I've been fortunate to be able to come here and talk with you. You're having this influence on me. You're actually energizing. It's a kind of life-affirming energy that I'm feeling because I'm in a room with other people that are also passionate about those kinds of values. But this is why I video. The video is only on me, okay? And Maria's done a lot of work on, I'll show you later, on living posters. Well, what I do is actually then reflect on the expressions from my own workshops to see in my own research, which is about living theory and participatory research, can I build up a more valid explanation of my influence? But am I being clear just about that difference between having a facility with words, which all of you will have to have with your research reports? So all of you, will have had to build texts. But I'm claiming at the moment, and you can take me up on this, that no amount of printed text can actually communicate the meaning of your energy-flowing values that you're living when you talk about care. And the living theory and the participatory research, through the use of digital video on our practice, I can show you where doctoral theses have been accredited, literally now throughout the world. But they're not only, as I say, using language, they're not only using text, they're actually showing the person in practice. Am I making, again, sense there? Have I covered the central values? Or are there any more that you're feeling as you think now, okay, what is moving me to conduct this inquiry? We've had the care and the human dignity and the inclusion. Are there any others that you're feeling? Okay, look, this is motivating me. This really matters to me.
Yeah. Because for me, it's research in my practice.
Yeah.
So it's looking back at what I do and see this kind of position.
Yeah, so that is another one, looking back and the learning. Is it the fact that if you carry out this kind of research, the heart of it is learning. So you need to explain your learning as you try to improve your practice. But there's one other thing as well, and I'll see if this makes sense, that not all learning is educational. That history is littered with examples of people that learnt a lot, but actually act against the human values that we hold. You know, I can just think of, I was born in 1944, the last war. People had learned how to exterminate each other. They'd learned very effectively, don't you? But that goes against what I believe educational learning is actually about. For it to be educational, I'm suggesting that the values you were talking about have got to come into your explanation of your influence. It's not only learning, it's your educational influence in learning where you bring those values. And I usually talk about those in terms of the values that carry hope for the flourishing of humanity. Those are the ones that I imagine everybody here, you're not only doing things for yourself in that egotistical sense, you're also wanting to have an influence within a systemic way that influences others. Okay? Now, I just want to just ask whether this is something which most of you will be familiar with. And it's just to do with an action reflection cycle because it's so basic to all forms of action research. But I just want to compare what you're interested in, because if you think in this room now, and we've got Nikki, is Nikki here? Nikki O'Leary? Yeah, Nikki. Now, Nikki, in terms of the research interest, was about a PhD in psychotherapy. Okay? And to gain an understanding of effective ways to capture clients' lived experiences of psychotherapy in order to enhance my practice. That's Nikki's. Then, if we go over the page of the ones that you've got, is Mary here? Mary Quirk? Is it Quirk? Mary? Okay, well, I've got here that Mary's was learning the fundamentals of participatory action research, no prior experience with AR. So we've got someone who's already got a doctoral thesis for a participatory action research process. And if you've got John Connolly on your list of research interests, this was on developing a comprehensive, integrated and contemporary recovery-orientated dual diagnostic service within the environment of primary and continuing care in Cork. So John has already got his doctoral thesis for participatory action research and is now into the postdoctoral phase. So we've got people who registered an interest in the workshop coming from, okay, I don't know anything about action research, I'm here to find out. We've got people that are into postdoctoral research, as I am myself, into trying to improve our practice, but with that perspective from participation and living theory. Okay, so I'm hoping that you'll actually be able to share during the day where you've got somebody that has done a lot of the work on participatory approaches. Many of you might not have actually generated your own living theory, and that is, I hope, something new for you. But what I'd like just to check with you is that everyone who undertakes action research, and it doesn't really matter whether it's participatory action research, collaborative action research, we've got this kind of basic action reflection cycle. And I just want to check with you that familiarity, when I'm talking about action research, I'm usually focusing on the use of the action reflection cycle. And this goes back to something like John Dewey. It's also with engineers. If you look at engineers, the way they go about improving practice, it really does actually focus on this kind of inquiry. But if you just have a look at what really matters to you, what do I care about, what kind of difference do I want to make in the world, what are my values? Now, what's my concern? Why am I concerned? What kind of experiences can I describe to show the reasons for my concern? What can I do about it? And then how do I evaluate the educational influences of my actions? How do I demonstrate the validity of my account? How do I modify concerns, ideas, actions, and the like of my evaluations? Now, when I was starting on this process, I was studying, as I think most of you have studied. Mine was at London University, and the philosophers, psychologists, and sociologists were telling me that educational theory was made up of those disciplines. So for me to understand educational theory, I had to demonstrate my knowledge of philosophy, psychology, sociology, or education. Now actually, if you go to different parts of the world, that is still the view that is held about educational theory. Now I began to challenge that view when I was a head of science at a school in London. Because no matter what I did, and I successfully passed the exams for the academic diploma in those subjects, I couldn't explain my educational influence using any of those theories. I had to actually generate my own explanation for how I was influencing the pupils in my care to actually build a valid explanation of my influence. So I concluded that the dominant philosophers at the London Institute genuinely had got it wrong. Now that wasn't very popular as a teacher coming to the most prestigious university in terms of philosophy, to say to those professors, actually, I think you've got this wrong about the whole idea of educational theory, because I'm saying there is a living form of educational theory, which is the explanation that each of you can generate from your own practice as you seek to explain your influence. And I'm calling that a living educational theory. Now that, as what I've kept to, and it's been quite successful around the world with the different doctorates and different universities that have now been awarded, and I'll show you how you can access them, where individuals have produced their explanations of their educational influence in their own learning, drawing on their theoretical understandings from philosophy, psychology, sociology, other theoretical perspectives, but none of those, individually or in any combination, can produce a valid explanation of your educational influence in your own learning. Am I making sense here? Because around the world, a lot of students are still having their own voices denied. They're still not being seen as knowledge creators. The whole thing is to be a consumer of knowledge. The academics have the knowledge, and the practitioner who can actually do the job and is working to improve it is not viewed as having the valid knowledge. So that is what moved me to come into the University of Bath in 1973, and I spent the whole of my working life there building up these narratives from practitioners and getting the master's and also the doctoral degrees. Now can I just pause there just for a moment? I'm just curious, are there any responses to that you feel it's related to your own inquiry or not? No?
I just think in terms of, I suppose, trusting the practitioner and teacher autonomy, I think it's something that we're definitely something that we're facilitating in Ireland, in that, you know, the openness of our curriculum, you know, the content isn't necessarily dictated. We have our objectives, and it's up to the teacher how they choose to fulfill them. I just think the whole concept of living theory and giving an opportunity for practitioners to see their works and their impact is very important.
One of the first lectures I gave in Ireland was to the Educational Studies Association of Ireland about 20 years ago. And you hadn't got a teachers' council. And now, it really is one of the most advanced ones in the world. You know, there's a Canadian, which is a big one. We've just closed ours in the UK. It's dreadful in England. But what I like about what you just said there is, I'll show you how you can access this, which relates to you, because for Irish, I'm just going to this one, for Irish teachers, I was having dinner with them last night, and they've actually done what you've said. They've been very influential. I don't know if you've heard of them, but They're called Network Educational Action Research Ireland. It's called NERI. Have any of you heard of that or not? Yes, some of you have. Not many. Yeah? Right, I'll just, if you go into actionresearch.net, I'll show you how you can access a Facebook that you can join. Now, I'm going for the current issue, which actually came out this morning. And if I just flick down to this Maureen Glenn here with the editorial forward, and then the book review by Jackie DeLong, and this is Katerina MacDonagh, Mary Roach, Bernie Sullivan and Maureen Glenn, Enhancing Practice Through Classroom Research, A Teacher's Guide to Professional Development. Now that's just come out, and this is their 4th book. Now I examined Maureen's thesis in 2006 and 7 at Limerick University, and at the same time the 3 other women that are actually jointly authoring this also got their living theory doctorates. And the first were a group of researchers, and this was at Limerick. They all had living theory in their titles. You know, this was a real precedent about them creating their own explanations of their own practice. But then, since 2006-7, they've generated, and hope to support, the Network Educational Action Research in Ireland. And I just hope you'll access what this review of Jackie DeLong's, because it places the Irish teachers right at the forefront of professional development programs. And Jackie is in Canada and did a lot of work with professional development in Canada, developing the practitioner research in it, but demonstrating that you as practitioners can generate, as I say, your own knowledge base and bring it into your professional context. And so this is something I'm hoping that you will access. And it's so easy to get these. You're going to, as I say, I hope, has anybody been into actionresearch.net yet, the actual web page? Because I asked, and again, I don't quite know, because they said we were going to circulate this information to you before the conference in a welcome pack, but I don't think you've had it, have you?
No.
Right, yeah, because, give me those two, because what you've got, what I've given out to you, what is this, this one here. And if you just go to the second page, and again, you can access this from my website. So you can, are you okay? Have you, do you want, which one? Have you got two? Okay, yeah, right. Because what I've been hoping for, because as I say, I sent these in a couple of weeks ago, that you might have just had an opportunity to click on just some of these links. Because on that second page you'll see, if you click on that one, as I say, you can access this from my home page and get into it. That brings you into the Educational Journal of Living Theories. We've got something which is really important. I'm hoping we can come on it later. It's at the bottom, which is how you might create what we call living posters, which is a way for you to actually contribute a little, and it's not difficult to do this, but I'll show you some of them so you can get an idea of how everybody in this room can actually, if you wish, continue to participate in a conversation together which can actually show an interest in the research you're doing and actually share in the inquiry with you. This is the heart of participatory research, that even though you're all doing different things, you can actually bring them into a space and a forum that you can just say what it is you're doing and get responses. I imagine, I don't know, but have any of you already got your own websites? Could I just ask, anybody? Could you just put your hand up if you've got your own website? Maybe that's one. Okay, so what I'm hoping is that you take advantage of free website provision. And I'll actually show you how by clicking on one called Spanglefish, you can generate free your own website with your own resources and your own materials. Okay, now, I mean, but what surprises me, because I went to Canada for the first time, did professional development, and this was in 1999, and not one person had got access to the net, not one, and this meant, emails. I went back and did some more 10 years later. Everybody in the room had got that kind of access. And at the heart now of participatory action research are the social media and the electronic communications, so we make available to each other what it is that we're actually doing. Now, let me just go into this, that it's a bit of a shame about this this particular one, because we learned last night that the educational journal was under cyber attack. It's a real nuisance, isn't it? We haven't had this before. It's okay because it's come up again, because it was sorted last night. But what I was hoping is that if you go into actionresearch.net, you've got two ways that you can actually use the social media. If you click on Facebook, you could go into the Living Theory Facebook page and just participate with others, with their questions, their interests, and what they're doing. I don't want to focus on that at the moment. I just want to tell you that is available. What I wanted to show you is this. If you go into the other home pages of interest, and you develop, you've got your own website. Now, what you could let us have is the URL for that website. Because what I would love to do by the end of the day, and this is only with your approval, it is to make sure that I've got your email addresses so that we can try and stimulate you to do what you've already done and produce a URL, but also with your own website, because each person here has generated their own website. And I'll just mention one or two, because the Participatory Action Research in Asia, this is actually organised by a guy called Rajesh Tandon, and you look at the sophistication of what they've done. It's a really beautiful page with lots of information. I think it must have been going about 30 years, but it's localised, okay? So even though this has got international implications, the actual, it is participatory research in Asia, and that's where it's actually focused. But you can get access to each of these. This one, Global Assembly for Knowledge Democracy. I was over in Cartagena doing this kind of workshop 2 years ago, and it was all about bringing indigenous knowledges into the public domain. It was your point about the voices of people. And this was in South America. There's some work going on in Australia, the Aborigine groups, and also in New Zealand with the Maori groups, to bring indigenous knowledge into the academy in the Western universities, because they've often acted to eliminate this kind of knowledge. I don't know what your experiences are in Ireland, but in the UK, I've actually got a letter from about a head teacher who asked the question, how do I improve my practice as a head teacher? This was for her doctorate. And it came back from one of the universities, Kingston University, will you please remove the personal pronoun I from your research title? Okay? So, please remove the I from the inquiry. Now, I don't know how silly that sounds, to you, because how could you possibly answer the question, how do I improve what I'm doing? And remove your I. Now, we actually got that reversed, as a judgment. So she could actually do it. But these are some of the tensions that I don't know if any of you have experienced this within the Irish context, because it feels, from what you were saying about the teaching force, that it's now more open to these very different kinds of inquiry. Is that right? That you're actually feeling you're getting a lot of support for the kind of inquiries you'd like to undertake? Because in Canada, I'll show you later how to access these, that one of the people who's just got her doctorate, she had some tensions with her supervisor who didn't think that a living theory or a participatory approach would be accepted by the university. And she stuck to it and actually managed, to be awarded the doctorate, but it was against pressure. It really had to be quite a struggle to remain true to her values and her sense of integrity. But what I was going to try and show you is, if you go into some of these, and Marie, can you see here, Marie's homepage? If you go into Marie Huxtell's homepage, and this is this little green item at the top. This little green item just says spanglefish.com. Now, what that one does, if you go into it on your own computer and get into that spanglefish.com, it explains how you can set up sites, your own website such as this, where you can put up your own papers. You see what Maria's done? She's actually put up personal stories, links to other sites, young researchers, inspiring women, free access to resources, and you can put up your own writings. Now, this is such an amazing facility in terms of you having that free access, because at the moment, I genuinely don't know anything apart from what you've actually sent through with all the research interests. If you let me have the URL, we can make your writings, your ideas, actually share them, and then we can sustain a conversation. Now, we've got a day together. The people that I'm working with, for example, on a lot of this work, some of us have been together 20, 30 years. The first doctorates started roughly in 1996. And the people are still now developing through their postdoctoral inquiries, going broader, more extensive in terms of the networks they're connecting with. But you at the moment, I'm nothing. Do you see what I'm getting at? If you want to develop a participatory approach, first of all, you've got to do what we've done, which is make your ideas, make your papers accessible, and I would say the web is now one of the best mediums to make available your own inquiries. But at the moment, as I say, just one person has got their own web page. Yeah? So if nothing else comes out of today, but just that thought that to participate in these networks and with these relationships, you need a way to get the communications going. Okay, now can I pause there? Are there any other responses before I go on? Our first break is at about 15 minutes, it's about 11. But is there anything now, showing the spanglefish, you've got the Educational Journal of Living Theories, you've gone through the action reflection cycle just to check that we're all on the same page. Now, yeah?
I just wanted to ask about sites like academia.edu, because you can put up your writings there and it doesn't cost you anything, you don't have to have your own URL, and people can still access your work on there.
So, could you just give that one again, please?
Yeah, academia.edu
Yeah?
or ResearchGate or any of those, where you set up a profile
Yeah.
and you can just put all your work up there, so if you don't have the time or the energy or the money to host a site yourself, you can use that kind
Yeah.
of...
There's, I've got work on those as well, but they're also making money out of it, and you're not in control of your own work. This is there's loads of them like WordPress and so on that you could use.
Yeah.
Me, I don't have time or patience for HTML, so all I have to do is click on this and I can put it up. It's free, and I'm in control of my own stuff, so I can put up a link from the ResearchGate or DocAct, the other ones. But I'm actually in control of my own stuff, so I can then send that around. And if I decide I don't want something on there, I can take it off. And if there's other things I want, I can put that on. So, yeah, there are other sites as well, but this is the only way I've found of actually having control over my own work.
But I also have an academia.edu,
and I have that as well.
But the bit that you have to pay for, I'm not using that
Yeah.
bit. I'm just
Yeah.
using free.
But
Yeah.
they've
These
still
are
got
really
the data.
important. And like you, I've on both of those
Uh-huh.
ResearchGate,
Yeah.
and I even get daily responses from ResearchGate, you know, to say your paper's been read or a reference to your work in. And it's great to belong to some of those because it starts to get your work actually in these different contexts. The advantage of this kind of thing, like with Facebook and some of these other forums, is that you can have ongoing conversations if you wish to. You know, like the ResearchGate, you put it up there. With this, the website, and as I say, there is no cost involved at all for stonefish.com. You can actually put up, like I showed you just before, about get your papers up there, just thoughts, what you're interested in, like you put your research interests. They're really fascinating. You know, this whole list, when you look at the whole list of inquiries that are going on in this room, and yet we don't have, when you talk about the inclusion, and certainly about participatory, I have no way of bringing what's in this room in terms of the knowledge into going to Montreal at the end of June to the Action Research Network of the Americas Conference. There are multi-screen Skypes bringing researchers from India, from about 5 or 6 different countries. From here, at the moment, whilst you've got these really exciting projects down there, I can't bring you into that forum, you know, so people come to and say, I come with John Connolly because John has got his doctorate actually in the DCU archive, and I can point to that as a participatory approach. It's all explicit, there's a whole section that I've given you a reference to that you can just access, and it's a lovely piece of work, and I can bring that into these other contexts, as I can with you now, you know, I can give you. But if you were to make this, just this one resolution to say, right, what's been stimulated today is the desire to get your voices into these kinds of contexts so we can have this international response as well as your local one, because this is what these conversations are really great at. And this is what participatory action research is actually designed to do. Now, the living theory that I gave you before, you've just got to recognise that nobody else can explain your educational influence in the learning of anybody. You know, once you've got that, it's actually then just one step to say you've got to knowledge, you've got to create your own. But you've got to make that decision to say, okay, yes, all the theories I'm getting at the university, some of them have got really important insights in them, but if I'm going to do some participatory action research and I'm going to generate my own living theory, I've got to be willing to create my own valid explanation of my influence, educational influence in my own learning, the learning of others, and the learning of the social formations that influence your practice. Yeah.
Just on, when you say educational influences, what you're referring to there is the values,
Yeah.
is it?
So
Your
it's
own
the-
personal values?
But it's also the learning. If it's educational, it must necessarily involve learning. But to be educational, it's got to connect with those values that I'm saying carry home. And again, my language is the flourishing of humanity. Now, when you say, is it my own personal values? Then what I do is I hold, and I'll show you the validation process. So that if I say to you, my first book in '93, it focused on academic freedom. And I've been through quite tense moments in the university where at some point I'd received a note terminating my employment. Okay? And the grounds were that I couldn't teach, I couldn't do research, and I disturbed the good order and morale of the whole School of Education. Okay? So I've got these in writing from Senate. Now, my passion, if you like, for educational research, academic freedom, moved me to contact the Campaign for Academic Freedom and Democracy. A professor of public law, John Griffiths, got onto the university, and they then had to give me tenure from 1973 to 2012. Yeah? Now, those values of mine, I can hold them up for you, and you could say, well, yeah, I can relate to that passion for academic freedom, I can relate to the one of justice. There's one which many of you, I don't believe, would have brought into any of your research, but I could be wrong, tell me if I'm wrong, but some of my students were telling me in the conversations that you had at the beginning about motivation, that they really did love what they did. And the notion of love as a value, I don't believe has come into, and you can correct me, any of your research that you'll put into the university for accreditation. Yet, I'll guarantee that for you to be doing what you're doing, you are being motivated at times by a love for what you are doing. Do you feel this is right? I think you'll all be very embarrassed about putting love into your academic tutors and as an academic standard of judgment. Yeah? And yet all of you, I believe, will have that quality and the passion of love for what you are doing. So when you ask about the values, it's quite courageous at the time. The first woman, and it was a woman, her whole doctorate was Love at Work. That was the title of it at the University of Bath in the early 2000s. It was the first time that love had been accepted as a legitimate explanatory principle at the university. And yet to explain why you are doing what you are doing, I'm claiming that love comes into who you are and what you're doing. And yet you want to put it in there. If you want to do the participatory action research process, again with the living theory, it does require quite an act of courage to do this. My emails are also love Jack, and it still embarrasses me a bit. And it was because our chief technician at the university died quite young, and it was one of those people that was infected. Did you ever hear about this? The blood scandal, where people were infected by him, yeah? And he died early. And I went to him, and it was 2 days before he died, and he just said, "Look, Jack, give my love to the department." And it was said so genuinely, right? So I then started signing, and I explained in my signature, "Love Jack," and why I've done it. But God, and I don't know, to the Vice-Chancellor, signed "Love Jack." And she found it very difficult to cope with. But because of Martin, he genuinely believed, and he was a beautiful character in the department. He really did embody that expression of love. And so I put that in my signature, it's still there. But it's like with you now, I think some of you would be embarrassed about bringing love for what you do into your inquiries. So would you please, just say, well, is Jack right? That I do love some of the things I do. If I was explaining why I'm doing what I'm doing, I will actually need to be honest about the values I hold and what is energizing at the heart of my inquiry. But I can just feel this. You would find this, rather difficult. But talk it over with your tutor if you wanted to do this kind of work, and be honest about you do love what you do. I hope it comes over for you in this moment that when I said you were energizing me, partially it is because I love what I do, and I've got a real belief in trying the value of bringing your knowledge and your embodied knowledge with your values into the public domain and sharing it. And that is what is motivating me in the here and now. And that is why I love what I do. So please, do think about not just the care is very important, very vital, that sense of inclusion, a passion for human rights, and also the most vulnerable members of our communities and what might you do to help those. But at the same time, when you're explaining your educational influences in your own learning, the learning of others, please open up to those values that give meaning and purpose to your lives. Those are the explanatory principles. Now, I don't want to go on too much about this, but I'll explain when you've had coffee and come back, how it's not just an anecdotal account. Why what I'm playing is not just subjective. Okay, I want to just show you some of the rigorous validation processes that we go through in creating the living theory and the participatory processes, so that when you claim that something has happened, you've explained it, it's not just your subjective judgment, that we subject it to what Karl Popper used to talk about, the mutual rational control of critical discussion. So a group like this, it will be much smaller than that in a validation group, perhaps about between 3 and 8 people. You subject at regular interview your explanations of influence to a group such as this, peer validation, about the comprehensibility. How comprehensible am I being? Does it make sense to somebody what I'm actually explaining? The crucial, the second one, same as any positivist scientist, is there sufficient evidence to justify my claims? And any positivist scientist would actually accept that as an important criteria for validation. Now the third one, almost no positivist scientist uses, and it is recognising that all of you, and you might not feel this, but everybody in the room that is part of an Irish context, you've got what we call a socio-cultural and socio-historic influences. And the fact that for 600 years, Ireland was actually colonised. There's a culture there. You've resisted. You become the nation in your own right. But that 600 years has sedimented influences of that kind of historical nature that it's wise to remember. And this is what I bring into the third criteria, that in your explanations of your influence, you recognise the socio-historical and socio-cultural influences that are acting on you. Now, they're different in different parts of the world. In Ireland, you've got this particular quality which many people have told me actually comes out of the 600 years of colonised, where you've got an oral culture. You know, you speak often, when you're speaking together, you speak very, very quickly. There's a kind of a real intuitive responsiveness to each other that comes out of your conversations that also shouldn't be ignored, because you've got a quality of community, I think, which you could also acknowledge within your accounts. Am I making sense here about the socio-historical and socio-cultural? And that's very important. And then the fourth criteria, which comes from this guy Habermas, is that it's called authenticity. That within your explanation of what you're doing, are you living as fully as possible the values you claim to hold? So it's like that issue of justice, it's like the issue of love, it's like compassion. That was one of my doctoral students, looking at Alzheimer's patients and carers. The whole thesis was a passion for compassion, which actually moved her to do what she did. I'll show you how you can access these after coffee. But can I just pause now and just say, look, when you come back from coffee, I've got, again, the given curriculum, but is there anything that in terms of your own interest now that has been stimulated that you're thinking, oh, I'd really like Jack just to respond to this point of mine after coffee? Have you anything of that kind that I can actually work with after coffee?
But one thing is how to convince your panel that this is rigorous enough.
Yeah, and I'll certainly, after coffee, I'll go through that. But just remember, if you're doing a doctorate, you've only got to convince 2 people. You know, what you...
I think you heard enough.
Yeah. But I'll go through and show you how we work through, you know, those with over 40 doctoral theses that successfully. So it's a crucial question, so I'll do that.
I think it's also convincing the ethics committee, and I'm getting a lot of resistance towards that. I haven't put my ethics application yet, but I want it to be as rigorous as I can to get through.
Yeah, no, again, let's go through the ethics, because one of the most exciting things for me was when one of the students in Canada was rejected by the ethics committee. But the ethics committee couldn't stop the student researching the influence of the ethics committee on his research. And his whole dissertation is actually attacking the ethics committee for not allowing him to do the classroom research that he believed he should be able to do. Now, it's a very powerful piece of work, and it's not to say that all ethics committees are unethical, but there is a point where you begin to see, well, who is making this judgment? So I'll go through carefully, just have 2 doctoral students go through the ethics committees successfully at the University of Cumbria doing this kind of work.
I believe my values don't necessarily fit with university standards of what research should be, and I feel I either have to hold back or really justify.
Yeah, and again, I hope that that interests you all, which is fundamental, because you're all, if you do this kind of work, you will be bringing new standards of judgment into the academy. If one of you brings love into DCU or whichever university you're studying at, you know, that would be an original contribution and very different to that university in terms of what it constitutes knowledge. So let's go through that very carefully. And I've got one or two examples I can point you to where people have had to justify, you know, to the ethics committees. And they've actually gone through. They came back. One came back once, one came back twice, but they went through, you know, meeting those questions. Is there anything else that you're feeling, yeah, I'd like this to be taken up because it's a concern that you've got? Yes?
Can you talk a bit about the relationship between the researcher and what is being researched, and
Yeah.
the people who are being researched, and maybe power dynamics and so forth?
Again, it's been a crucial question. Right. Who is a participant? Who counts as a participant in participatory inquiry? If you're doing action research, again, are the students that you're working with? And I'll go through that. Really, that's again another vital question. Anything else? I've got three.
I get caught up in all these different schools of action research. You've mentioned collaborative, and you also see written classical action research.
Yeah.
Maybe it's too tactical, but we'd love to get a bit of clarity about how all these different versions are different in themselves.
Does that sound okay? Yeah? Okay, so I'll go through what I understand as the different schools and what distinguishes, you know, the different schools of thought in action research. And I'll point you to some of the most recent. I've got them listed. Some of them are actually on that handout. You'll see if you go into the reference section some of the most important international handbooks on action research. So I'll certainly cover that. Yeah. Any others?
Just, I suppose, in a way, I suppose, tips is the wrong word, but you know, it sounds a little bit, to me it sounds a little overwhelming almost to produce a website and put my thoughts out there, and I know that's ultimately where we'll have to go, but almost a sense of or a sense of that you can begin to move this journey. I know this is the beginning of a journey, you know, but within your piece of work.
Yeah, exactly.
I do.
No, I had to start.
Tips to kind of get you moving in that direction.
Yeah.
It may not be
finished. It's the bedrock. Yeah. That is the bedrock of all this work. That question, how do you get started? And that action reflection plan I'll show you earlier, for me, that has been one of the most successful methods that people all understand and it gets them going. But I'll go back through that and then you see that. So that's the, just how do you get started? Yeah? The different schools, you know, then let's go through, you know, the issues to do with the validity, we'll do that. And if I miss anything, bring me back to it, okay? Is there anything else you're feeling? Because this, yeah?
It could come under something else you just said there, but the nature of the problem in action research, how tight does that have to be?
Again, that's the nature of the question. I say to often my PhD students, look, the question you've answered is actually the last thing you understand. You see, in traditional research, you've got to put your question right at the beginning of your research proposal. In action research and living theory research, it's actually the very last thing you understand. What question does this thesis answer? But let's come back to that. Will you have a break now? Because they've got coffee at tea at 11 o'clock. And then back at 11:15 if you can. Please, yeah.
The schedule is 11:15 for coffee until 11:15.
Does it? Ah, right. I've got one here. Okay. Good. I'm sorry, it's me. Oh, no, I got... Yeah, sorry, that's me. Oh, sorry. Back. Yes, 11:15, thank you. No, 11:15, that's good. Yeah. Are there any other points that you want me to take up after? Because I can deal with certainly the validation one. Or, yeah? Is there anything else that you're feeling? Because
I suppose training might be the right word, but how to facilitate your participants to engage in action research, participants of your research project.
Yeah.
As a model for them to kind of engage with,
I know.
to enhance their practice.
In fact, it's at Maynooth. That's one of your universities, isn't it?
Yeah.
They brought in a module which is linked to these ideas. But they're having to introduce tutors who are not used to this to the processes so they can help the students. And this idea of how do you begin to take groups of people who are not familiar with these to actually start the process with them? And we've got a university called Newman University, and one of our students, Joy Mounty, she's a doctoral student, she's also the lead for the master's programme, is faced with exactly that problem, that Newman University has just accredited a whole values-led leadership using living theory methodology for their master's programme. And what Joy is going to have to do is try to work to bring the participants and tutors to an understanding of these processes to help, and for the students themselves to become action researchers. But you might enjoy, I've got some resources that show you on video 6-year-olds actually engaging explicitly in an action research process. I've got 10-year-olds from Croatia who are actually showing you how they use their classmates as a validation. They use this language to actually improve the validity of their action research, and these are 10-year-olds. Yeah, so I'll show you where you can access that, because until some of the teachers saw these 6-year-olds and 10-year-olds doing this, they would not believe that the children could do it. The 6-year-olds took one of our nation's foremost researchers in terms of the action reflection cycle, and it's called the task wheel, thinking actively in social context. These 6-year-olds have got the videos where they're going through the 2-dimensional model of the task wheel. These 6-year-olds are saying to their teacher, look, this is in 2, and they're using the language. They said, no, ours actually is 3, because we've got time, and it comes up like this, in a dynamic way. And they wrote with the teacher's help. They wrote a letter to Belle Wallace, who was the researcher. And Belle Wallace, didn't do it justice, came down to the school, and she talked to these 6-year-olds, and she had to agree with them that her 2-dimensional model was actually not sufficient. And one of the boys came back, didn't he? Was it a couple of years later, and said, do you know that work we did, where I was saying it was 3 dimensions? Well, I've got it wrong. It's actually 4 and it may be 5, and he went through these different... Now, until you've seen these, you don't believe that the children are capable of doing this. So I think that's a really crucial question. Any others? Okay, so can I just then, before coffee, can I just take that question about how do you strengthen the, if I say validity, because one of the key researchers in the late 1980s in terms of these processes was called Richard Winters. And one of his key texts was called Learning from Experience. And Richard didn't really go for the idea of validity. He preferred rigour. Now, what Richard did was give 6 principles for the conduct of action research that can help to strengthen the rigour. Now, again, I've got all these listed on my website. I'll show you how to access a whole dissertation that showed how to use Winter's 6 principles of rigour to improve the action research account. But if I just mention the names, I think you'll get the idea that he talked about reflexive and dialectical critique. Those were 2 of the ways. Now, I think all of you will have engaged in the idea of reflection. Now, have you come across this notion reflexive, where you do another reflection? Okay, so being reflexive would be to actually isolate the principles, like when you talked about the care, and you would judge your inquiry in terms of the meaning of care and whether care was being lived as fully as you could. And that is known as the reflexive critique. Dialectical. I don't know again how many of you have got on the inside of dialectics, but there was a very key text. It was in 1977. It was Edward Ilyenko. He was a Soviet logician, and it was beautiful, this work. And he said, look, if an object exists as a living contradiction, what must the thought be, and then i.e. statement about the object, that expresses it? Now, all of you, I think, will be under the influence of a logic that was established 2,500 years ago by Aristotle. And Aristotle had what he called the law of contradiction. And the law of contradiction says you can't have two mutually exclusive statements that are true simultaneously. Okay? Yet, if I say to you, look, the videos of my practice show I am both free and not free. I believed I got inquiry learning going in one of my classrooms, and in fact I was giving the pupils the questions. The video demonstrated this. I was a living contradiction. Right? But the logic that you've all used at the universities denies that you can put a living contradiction into your explanations or your theories. Two mutually exclusive statements that cannot, according to Aristotle, be true simultaneously. Now, on the surface of it, on the face of it, that looks sensible. You can't have two mutually exclusive statements that are true simultaneously. But if you think about and reflect on your own practice, I'll guarantee that sometimes you experience yourself as a living contradiction, as I did when I saw myself on the video. And that I, as a living contradiction, is at the heart of dialectics. Dialectics is focus on contradiction. That's the nucleus. Now you can imagine that some philosopher like Karl Popper, he's got a whole text demonstrating that dialectics, he says, is nothing better than a loose and woolly way of speaking, and that if you have contradictions in theories, they're entirely useless as theories. So you've got this clash, and it's been going on for 2,500 years, this. Now, a dialectical critique acknowledges your existence as a living contradiction. You place into your explanation and what you're doing the fact that you can hold values and negate them at the same time. You can actually, as I did in the classroom, I believed, I got inquiry learning going, the videotape showed that however subtly I was giving my students the questions. Now that was a real eye-opener for me. I wasn't being hypocritical, I just did not know. I thought I was doing something I wasn't. And that immediately stimulated my imagination to think of a way forward. Now that's the dialectical critique. Then you've got what he called plural structure, that your thesis should have a plural structure, in that some of you, for example, may use poetic forms of expression. Others might use visual, digital data. You've got all of these different approaches you can use, which he called a plural structure. And he said risk is also involved. You know, it's like this thing about the love. If you really bring love into your account, and you actually want your work to be accredited in the university, that really will involve some risk. Because like you were saying with the ethics committee, you know, you've actually got an issue there in terms of sticking to your values, but being aware that they may not be accepted in the academy as being legitimate. And he goes on to others as well. He calls multiple resource, where you build in resources and insights from a range of different theoretical perspectives. And the last one is that you should be engaged in what he calls theory-practice transformation. But I'll show you where you can just access a beautiful dissertation from this Singapore student who just used the 6 criteria to strengthen the rigour of her account. And she's called Peggy Leon. But as I say, I'll show you that when you come back. Now, And what I'd like, if this is okay, when you come back from coffee, if I start with the ethics, because I think all of you will have to, at some point, if you're doing this kind of research, come across ethics committees approving. And it's unfortunate that we're saddled sometimes with inappropriate principles that have come from the social sciences. You know, they're actually doing research on somebody else. Whereas action research is not doing research on, it's doing research with. Is that okay? We'll come back. And also, this is what I was mean by us creating our own living curriculum. Okay, because I've got material that come with a given, but you're actually now helping me to make sure that what I'm doing is relevant to your own inquiries in the creation of this living curriculum together. Now, I haven't got the timing right now. We're on. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. It's in about 15 minutes. And the whole thing is on the ethics of personal narrative subjective research. So who's really interested in the ethics? I know quite. Who was it? Yeah. Because this one, as I say, goes into the whole thing that you'll be interested about the personal ethics and how you negotiate with a university in terms of their ethics committee. And Jeff found his way, even though he was being blocked from carrying out the particular classroom research that he wanted to undertake. Nevertheless, he got his master's degree by studying that language there. And we got it about the personal, subjective, the narrative ethics of conducting this kind of inquiry. And you can just get the whole lot, it just downloads. But I'll just quickly show you where you can access it. It's just that there's the embodied knowledge of master educators. If you go into actionresearch.net, so I'll just go back into the Safari to start it again. We're going to a new tab. There's the actionresearch.net. And here you've got Master Educators Writings. And at the bottom of that, you've got all master's units, and then at the bottom, you've got the master's dissertations, and Jeff's is there. So you've got a whole range with different questions. The I is in quite a number of them. But that whole thing is downloadable, the whole thing, as I say, accessible for you. And any of these are freely available for you to quote from as you wish.
Sorry, can I just ask, the website you showed us from spangledfish.com,
Yeah.
what was the name of that person's
That was
website?
Marie, in fact, that's Marie there.
Oh, perfect.
Marie.
And believe me, it's seriously simple. You can just put up one thing.
Okay, perfect.
What Maria's done with a lot of people from the research groups is just stimulate them to go into the website and just to see, in terms of going into Marie Huxton's website by clicking, and you can just access it directly in terms of the Spanglefish website. You go into that and it just goes through a very simple way of constructing it. Anything else that you...
Just the guy who did the dissertation on the ethics, what was he trying to do in the classroom? It was so troublesome.
Well, remember this was about 19 years ago when a lot of ethics committees could not understand that as a teacher you could conduct your own research on your own practice without violating the ethical rights of your students. Now, this teacher research movement, it's been going from 1972, Lawrence Stenhouse helped to get it underway. And yet you still have people like at Brock University that actually managed to stop some classroom research taking place on ethical grounds that this research was being done with children and was to be stopped. So I think here it's now...
It was just because they were his own students?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's do it.
I mean, they've moved on. I mean, the woman just put her PhD at the top here. It's well worth having a look at this. She's called Liz Campbell, and if you go into this top one here in actionresearch.net, which are the doctoral theories, this is proposals about supervision. So you can go into either of these, but these are the doctrines by living theory. And a lot of them have used action research and participatory approaches. But it's this, when I was talking about love, and this only went through a few months ago, and it is Elizabeth Campbell's doctorate, How Has Love Influenced Me as a Teacher, Researcher and Learner? A narrative inquiry into a teacher's abrupt awakenings. Doctor of Philosophy. So you get there, and you go up there, you'll see what the abstract is about, a holistic approach to learning, honours the whole student. I introduce love into my practice, discover the obstacles and challenges in living more fully, according to my values of love, hope, and joy. And again, I believe that each one of you will be able to identify with those expressions at some point, that you want to experience joy a lot in terms of hope. You know, the only thing often that keeps us going sometimes is that feeling of hope, that life and what we're doing is hopeful. And Liz has got her doctorate by showing her meanings of love, hope and joy, and how these form the explanatory principles. And she used a narrative inquiry methodology, and this notion of methodological inventiveness. And that's a very important idea. It comes from Marian Datz. Methodological inventiveness. And Marian Datz and Susan Hart, 2002, they had a book on doing practitioner research differently. And up to the point, it was usual to pre-specify your methodology. So you have a research proposal, you pre-specify your methodology. Yeah? Now, in living theory research, you actually generate your methodology as you explain your educational influence. And that's what Marian and Susan were talking about, methodological inventiveness. That you recognise that as a knowledge creator, you're also generating your appropriate methodology in the course of the inquiry. So you're not just imposing a whole structure like ethno methodology, like case study. You know, there's a guy, Creswell, he said you had to choose one of 5 methodologies before you got your research underway. Now, of course, in living theory, that is a nonsense. Because in the course of asking, how do I improve what I'm doing, you're actually generating the methodology which is appropriate for your inquiry. You might draw insights from narrative inquiry, from action research, and other methodologies. But you don't just impose a single methodology on your inquiry. I hope I'm being understood there, because that idea of methodological inventiveness is really important in terms of living theory research.
So like I started my PhD 3 years ago. I'm in year 3 of 6 part-time, and I initially had an idea I would do like emancipatory participatory research, and just recently I've realised that I'm doing cooperative inquiry through the ways that I've decided it would be nice to work with a research team and how it would work. So is that the kind of thing that you mean?
Yeah, very much so. You know, that where I was asked about these distinctions between different schools of thought in action research. You know, if you go right back to the beginnings, it wasn't an educator, it was Kurt Lewin in the 1940s, just put forward the action reflection planner. Yeah? And then, if you did, in 1953, if you had Google available to you and you did a search, only one text would come up in education, and it was by Stephen Corrie in 1953. It was action research to improve school practices. So when you think in 1953, there was one text, yeah, in education. Now, if you search, there are millions, literally millions, if you do the Google search. Now, what has sometimes been known as the classical approach, use that from action reflection cycle that I actually showed you at the beginning, which is, look, I've got an issue, sometimes you've got a concern, some people didn't like the idea of a problem because it seemed to say they had a problem, whereas, you know, scientists, they think, well, no, it's actually a problem, They prefer other people are concerned. I've got a concern, you might want to improve. What this does is stimulate your imagination to think, okay, well, what might I do about it? And sometimes several possibilities occurring, you choose one to act on, which becomes your action plan. And as you act, you gather some data to make a judgment about how effective you're being. Then you evaluate how effective using the data as evidence. Are you okay with this? And then the movement that goes from the classical action research, which there is your action research, that action reflection cycle. When I started to develop the living theory approach, which was grounded in my action research, that was in about 1980-82, I added on to that you're producing a valid explanation of your educational influences in learning. So you go through the action reflection cycle. One of the purposes as a knowledge creator is to generate your valid explanation of influence, which every one of those doctoral theses on there actually explain their educational influence in learning. Are you okay? Is that?
Yeah.
Now, that classical notion, I hope you've all got that sense, yeah, you'll be using possibly action reflection cycles. That goes right back to Louis in 1946. It then went underground, and I met one of the guys, he's called Arthur Fouché, who worked with Stephen Corrie. And this was in the 1990s, and he said that in America, action research went underground, and it was actually taken over by behavioural psychologists. And then it started to have an upsurge in the late 1980s and 1990s. And by then, another approach had come in to the classical notion of just the action reflection cycle, which was initiated by a guy called Stephen Kemmis and his colleague Wilf Carr. And an amazing group of academics worked with Lawrence Stenhouse at what was called the CARE, Centre of Applied Research and Education. And there was Stephen Kemmis, there was Wilf Carr, Jean Ruddock, a whole series of them, David Hamilton, Barry MacDonald. Then Wilf and Stephen, they moved to Australia, to Deakin University. And in 1982, they published a different approach to the action research, which became known through their book, Becoming Critical, Knowing Through Action Research. And this was the first time that critical theory had been literally imposed on the action research process. I'm not sure how many of you have met the fundamental tenets of critical theory, but the critical theory school was started after the Second World War in Frankfurt. And there are key players like Habermas, Theodore Adorno, Horkheimer, Eric Fromm. They were all members of this critical theory school. And they developed it to prevent what they called the mass psychology of fascism. That was their intention in the critical theory school. And they believed that by revealing the underlying oppressive forces that are at work, like within a capitalist formation, Eric Fromm does this beautifully in all of his life's work. He analyses the influences of capitalist formations on a humanistic personality. You know, what must you do to live a loving, productive life, given that you're faced with these constraints of a capitalist influence? And what Stephen and Wilf did, it's really well worth reading about Becoming Critical, is demonstrate how a critical theorist would strip away what other people like Polanyi call the crippling mutilations of particular kinds of thought, which are linked to the economic rationalist position. You know, economic rationalism is the imposition of a capitalist formation on what we do. And the first World Congress on Action Learning, Action Research, it's got a beautiful paper by MacDonald, which was showing how a capitalist formation leads to what they call devaluation and demoralization. If you just have economic rationalism as your central value that's imposed, then it does lead to that kind of despair, really, of the reduction of hope, which the critical theorists believe that if you actually get on the inside of showing why people are experiencing this, by stripping away the impositions of the economic and the political and the cultural, then you can become emancipated. Now, there are questions about what that works, because what people do is it didn't work. They just actually learn how to articulate critical theory. Yeah? And one of the key advocates, which it was a beautiful lecture, we gave a keynote here about 4 years ago. It's called Bud Hall. Do you remember I showed you that Participatory Research in Asia, with Rajesh Tandon? Now, Bud Hall holds the joint chair in community folk-based research with Rajesh Tandon at the United Nations. And Bud Hall, in his lecture 4 years ago, it was really lovely, but he used critical theory, and at the end he said, here are 4 questions which I am asking myself. And these 4 questions could be influenced by critical theory. They were all like overcoming racism. They were all framed in that language. And I asked him, after giving his keynote, and I asked him 2 years later as well, in Canada, Dad, you gave his keynote, these are the questions you said you were committed to. Have you any evidence that you've answered your questions, or even researched them? And he hadn't. So somebody influenced by critical theory had asked really good questions, but had not taken on the personal responsibility of researching them. Right? Now that's one of the difficulties. If you get into critical theory and that becoming critical as another school of thought of action research, that is something you want to ask yourself as you go through it. Has this individual accounted for their own practice in terms of the values that they say they espouse? Then you have John Elliott, and John also worked at Calm with Stephen and Will and the others. So there are all these connections. And John focused on the importance of what is called hermeneutics. That hermeneutics is a theory of understanding. It's often to do with biblical texts. How do you understand a text? And John was really strong on interpretive approaches. Not coming from a critical theory school, but it's like Richard Winter, really getting on the inside of the explanation that is being given. You've got cooperative, and that's often used together with collaborative. It is sometimes used interchangeably. And somebody was looking at that. You were talking, weren't you, just when you went for lunch, it was about the health visitors and the desire to do, is it the cooperative, the collaborative?
Collaborative, I think, yeah.
Yeah, because they're used interchangeably. And you've got to just be clear about how you are using that notion of collaborative. Because in a collaborative inquiry, you can often use we. So if you ask that question, how do we improve our practice? Now, in my experience, the we is usually used by one person imposed on others. It's very rarely a genuine we, in the sense that people have come together and really focusing on the we questions. Now, it's more confusing because the start of the participatory action research, which began in Colombia, and it began with the 2 people. The guy, Rajesh Tandon, was also influential. But in Colombia, the participatory action research movement started with this guy, Orlando Falls-Border. He died recently, but he's fascinating because he was a professor of sociology of education in Colombia. And for 25 years, he left the university to work with what he called the peasants and the rural workers in Colombia. And then he went back into the university and helped to create the new constitution for Colombia. It's a fascinating guy. But what he did in participatory action research is that everybody had the same problem. The whole group that came together to work on it had the problem that they were being cheated by the energy companies. Right? So they all had the same problem. Now they worked together and they were successful in overcoming the corruption in terms of the bills and what they were being charged for their energy. And this was being described by Orlando as a participatory action research process. But it's only in particular communities where you get that shared issue. Here, you'll find you've all got different inquiries. Even if you engage in a cooperative, or collaborative inquiry, I'm saying I think you'll find it quite difficult to focus in on a genuine we question. Yeah, so you've just got to be careful if you go for cooperative or collaborative. What is the nature of the relationship between you and the participants? It's great if you can get everybody collecting together and then coming up with their own inquiry, which you share sometimes over years. And you can help each other to form their question, to really work on it in a collaborative inquiry. And that's with your health visiting issue.
Yeah, and you're quite right, Jack. While I might be passionate about the subject, I lack the insight to know that they are not. And it's quite difficult. Sometimes it feels like pulling teeth. And I don't wish to put anyone off in the room here of starting down the road of, I suppose, going out there. It's really hard work.
Yeah.
It's the hardest part of it, is to get that interest, that growth of interest among everybody to generate a fire.
Yeah.
No, it's
Now, isn't that am I very nasty to say that? Everyone I'm putting you off, am I? But it is quite difficult, and yet it's called collaborative because it's the closest to what I can call it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do, but yeah. Yet, what you're describing is certainly my experience. I helped form 3 school-based teacher research groups, Swindon and Salisbury. And they went on for 3 years and they got their master's units and we met within the school, so it's school-university partnership. Now, those were genuinely collaborative because the head teacher and some of the senior staff were part of the group. And people all came together, and this was a weekly basis, it was amazing. Yeah? Now, that actually worked. But other groups where you haven't got that kind of institutional support, it's coming often from a senior leader that was supporting it, you don't get the we questions of it, you don't get the collaboration.
I sometimes wonder, is it a case study rather than, there's that fine element of collaborating or not.
Yeah.
That's it.
And you're far better going with the idea of a case study.
Yeah.
Because the difference with a case study is that if suppose you ask a question, as a head teacher, how do I improve my practice? That becomes and can't be a case study because you're putting yourself forward as a head teacher. And then other head teachers, you are undertaking an inquiry which you believe, in terms of the population of head teachers, this is a case study of being a head teacher. Okay? If you ask the question, how do I improve my practice? You are a head teacher, that can become a living theory process. But yeah, this is where it's really important to say, look, am I asking the question about case study? Another one that you might enjoy, and it's not a living theory, it's called autoethnography. Now, I've described all these, and I'll show you how you can access them. There's a very powerful text from South Africa, from what's called the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Kathleen Pithouse-Morgan, we've got a lovely text, and that actually was done, strangely, collaboratively, right, with their staff, but they all focused on autoethnographic accounts. Now, the reason that that becomes important is, if you know what ethnography is, ethnography gives a primacy to cultural explanations. So an ethnography always gives primacy to the influence of culture. Okay? Autoethnography, the auto allows you to put your eye in there. That's what the auto stands for. It's a self-study. With it being autoethnography, you'll still see that all of these texts coming out of South Africa still give primacy to the cultural, the ethnography. What are the cultural influences? And all these contributors, what they did was show the influence of the culture on themselves, but they did not explain their own educational influences with their own students or each other. Am I making, yeah? So I think it's just like that seems to me to be a way forward for you to acknowledge this is a case study.
Yeah. I've actually, believe it or not, I've written both methodologies.
Right.
So, whichever one, I suppose when the data is fully collected, whichever one closest resembles, I will go with.
And also in your writing, you do remember that what you, for example, you could be writing something this week which you can use as data for the next one. And it's really important, this, because people don't often understand that what is your evidence-based narrative literally now, in 3 months' time, can become data that you draw on in the next process of creating your living theory. Are you okay with this in terms of that distinction between data and evidence? It's a very, very important distinction. Data is just information you gather. Yeah? Now, what you do is draw on data when you actually claim to be explaining something, and you put some of the data, you use that as evidence to justify the explanation that you're making. So data is what you gather. It's only when you use it in a claim to know or an explanation that it actually is transformed into evidence. You use it to put beyond reasonable doubt that your claim is accurate and true. It's like a police court, you know, that you don't think about measurement, you know, numbers. You say, look, I've established beyond reasonable doubt that my explanation is justified and true. Going through those processes that I've talked about in terms of validation and rigor. Anything else that you're feeling?
Can I just ask, is your question then that you're researching is how do I improve my collaborative approach with others?
Yes.
And that would then be living theory methodology that you use? Using, because that story of the difficulties.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you, originally
Sorry.
it burnt with excitement for everybody, but it went out and it entered a phase where a lot of people fed back into, like when I was looking to improve practice, a lot of it, I suppose it got a negative connotation in that we have a lot of shortages of staff and burnout. And it changed the vibe of the thing, you know, I had to readdress, and this is actually my third pilot it's on now, but it's I suppose it's starting to progress, it's starting to shape, but I learned quite a bit out of doing my 2 pilots, I'll be honest, more than I've ever learned in the classroom, but it was quite difficult. I definitely set off with a case study, and then I thought it was an action research, but I'm kind of leaning towards the other again now. But as you said, it's a living...
It's your inquiry that's you've got running alongside this.
Yeah.
How do I improve the collaboration with others? And those stories then of the peaks and troughs.
Yes.
Actually, I find it really encouraging to know how you've gone through those, how far you've managed to go through, because there's no perfection.
Oh, it's quite difficult though sometimes. It can be difficult, yeah. And even to tweak the tool again, is it?
But again, it's being open to the fact that that is what you have been doing. And it's not to reject one of them, it's to actually acknowledge that this was the state of your research, you were exploring both case study and living theory, and this is where you've moved to.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It does open up other avenues, and you see a sharper focus. It sharpens the lens, but it's quite soul sometimes.
Can actually research be integrated with case study? You know.
Yeah, and I'll explain how it can be. Michael Bassey, he was the president of the British Education Research Association, and he's got a beautiful paper, you can search him on Google, on case study. Lawrence Stenhouse, just before he died, again, had a lovely paper, it was about 1980, on the study of cases. Yeah? So he actually distinguished between the idea of a case study, making sure you understand what a case study is, but also distinguishing it from you explaining your educational influence. Now, the reason that you can draw insights from case studies in the generation of your own living theory is that, for example, you can go to the literature like case studies on being a head teacher and all of the issues that arise from being a head teacher through case study. You can then draw insights from that research and that literature in the generation of your own living theory. Okay, but it's difficult to go the other way around. It's difficult to have your own explanation of your educational influence and then say that this is a case study. What I'll do is I'll try and show you how to access where I've gone through about 7 different methodologies and explain just how to distinguish those from a living theory, one that has been created. I'll show you how you can access those from the actionresearch.net. Yes?
So I'm still struggling a bit with collaborative action research.
Yeah.
I heard exactly that at the core of it is the question, how can we improve our practice? Could the practice of the researcher and the participants be a different practice though, that they both end up improving different practices, or does collaborative mean has to be the same?
No, that's if you like, one of the important questions about this idea of also participation. Who is a participant? So if you talk about the idea of collaboration, I was studying for my own doctorate and I was running teacher researcher groups in the 3 schools. I was studying my own practice as a university academic, passionate about professional development of teachers, so I was conducting my own research and my own practice. The teachers were all focusing on how do I improve what I'm doing with my pupils in the classroom. There were 2 school leaders present who were looking at how did they improve their influence with the staff in the school as leaders. Yeah? So we had those kinds of different questions, but we were all together supporting each other, literally in a collaborative process where people would be sharing their research with each other and each person would be trying to help another to take their research forward with very different questions. But what they all reported was that even sometimes when they didn't present their research, they actually learned a great deal from other people presenting and then responding to their research. Now that process has been described by this guy Simon Riding. Again, I'm show you just how to access that. So if you are interested in those questions and how to get these processes working, and who is a participant, also some of the ethics that Simon had to deal with, will be in there. If you go into that, again, this is for everybody, into the actionresearch.net, and then if you go into the living theory pieces there, and you just scroll down. Now, these are really interesting. This one I examined in Utrecht in the Netherlands, all about cosmopolitanism. And it was all about how a university there had actually, in its vision, talking about being cosmopolitan. Yeah? And the member of staff actually was pointing out that it got nowhere near living its vision values in its practice. And that again created some internal issues, but she overcame those and was awarded it. Now the ones that we were just talking about, it was the only husband and wife that I've actually supervised. Again, and these were successfully completed. And it's Simon Riding, again, he's become a head teacher. At the time he was working on a CPD within a school. So that's Simon. It was had this notion of living educational space. So living myself through others as a practitioner researcher, and his partner Karen, again, how do I come to understand my shared living educational setting that I lead with others? Again, I think you really enjoyed this because it was all about creating a space for intergenerational student-led research. And again, I think quite a number of you are interested in those kinds of relationships as you're trying to get participatory or collaborative work going. Are you okay with that? Again, if you've got any issues, just drop me an email and I can send you immediately the URL, but that's where you get that. Okay?
Sorry, can I just ask you something? For my research, I want to challenge the power relationships between people in study. So I want to call the people that I'm working with co-researchers instead of participants. I'm quite passionate against that because I want to do research with them, not on them. What's your opinion on using the term participants?
What's the last phrase? What was the...
So
using...
it will be a research team and we'll be co-researchers.
Yes.
And I don't want to use the term participants because I want to challenge the power relationships.
Yeah, I would always go myself through the co-researcher because there's such ambiguity about the meaning of the participants and the participatory. Very, very different meanings. Where if you talk about a co-researcher, as you know, the previous question, people can have their different inquiries, but you're working with them, and they're working with you in terms of their process of inquiry. And a community, a very strong learning community, can form practitioner researchers that can support each other. So I like that very much, of co-researching.
For yourself and them?
Yes, very much so. In fact, I told you about the one with Joy Mounter, that if anybody wants to follow that up, where the children were actually looked on as co-researchers. So in the Master Educators section, where that Jeff Sullivan Gladwell one was, I'll just go down to Understanding Learners and Learning. Now, the head teacher, she was a head teacher, Joy Mounter, she's now at the Learning Institute in Cornwall doing her PhD, and she's got legitimated at Newman University this new values-led MA in leadership. It's just been validated 2 months ago. Now, if you get access to this, I use this a lot, about understanding learners and learning. Can children carry out action research, into their own learning? Now, what Joy did was explain that she said to them, the kid, right, well, tonight I'm going to the university and I'm studying my teachers and learning. The module was about understanding learners and learning. And Marie was there with her and said, the kids were outraged, genuinely outraged. And they said, but how can you study without us? How can you study teaching and learning without us? Yeah? And that's where this whole paper that she got, it was very impressive, this paper, because it's got videotapes of her working with the children as co-researchers. That's where they wrote to this president of the Gifted Education Association and got her down. And that's where it really is for the children as co-researchers. Yeah. I'll just go down and show you that you can access that. Some of the models that they built to show the three-dimensional nature of what we were calling their action research process. But down in the appendix, you'll get access to the video clips which show these 6-year-olds, and that's the task wheel in front of them. And it just goes through, and they are working with the teacher as co-researchers, trying to understand the nature of their own learning. Again, any issues about accessing some of this, I can just send you the URL, but you get that from the, it's a lovely piece of work, that. Can children carry out action research about learning, creating their own learning theory? Now, if 6-year-olds can work with a teacher as co-researchers, again, I like that idea of being a co-researcher, because you can ask very different questions, but you can form what is often called a community of practice to actually support each other.
I think also psychologically might influence them to cooperate more if they are co-researchers rather than participants, because they feel more that their values are maybe. Isn't that true?
I do think so. On the same list of accounts, there's one by Sally Cartwright. Okay, now Sally did the same one with 17-year-olds, and then in the UK there was something called the Extended Study Project, and well, there are eight of these 17-year-olds. They formed their own research group, and it's an amazing group when you consider it. In this one school, 5 of these got into Oxbridge, and another got into the first university of their choice. And they all acknowledged afterwards it was because they had actually worked together. They brought their own inquiries, very different inquiries, and we've got some of them listed on our webpage. But they all learned together, so they learned a lot about the processes of research by being together within community. So I think, again, that's really important, especially if you take Marie's point that listen to the question that you're actually asking. You know, what is it that you would like to improve? And it might be to improve the co-researching of a group. Yeah? So,
Can I just ask, to be sort of classified as a co-researcher, what kind of level of involvement would those individuals need? Like, because presumably at the end anyway, the academic researcher is going to be writing up the work.
That isn't an easy question to answer because with the teacher research group, you know, practitioner research groups, they were meeting weekly. So every week, you know, it took about 13 weeks to get up to a master's module and successful completion of a master's module. Now, one that came through, this was about 3 weeks ago, came from the University of St. Thomas in Bolivia. Okay? Now, I went over there in 2016. I gave a workshop on it, not like this one. That one lasted for 5 days. So it's 5 days workshop on these inquiries. And the staff, they were fantastic. Most of them were Spanish speaking, whereas, you know, I had a very, very good interpreter. Now, the head of department invited me was called Fernando Galindo. He'd been over to Bath, liked what I was doing, and then he invited me over to his university. Now, 3 years later, I get this research report, which is submitted for a degree in this university. He's already got a doctorate. And unusually, nobody's ever done this. He got 100% for this. And it was all based on creating his own little theory in terms of changing assessment practices within his university. Now, that came out of the blue to me because 3 years later, he's acknowledged the influence of that workshop, and it's all in the report. So that, it was almost like a silence for 3 years, and yet the ideas had actually had an influence. So some, it was literally on a weekly basis. This is quite difficult because I have found that if you let things go, for example, with communities of researchers, for more than 3 or 4 weeks without a connection together, you can lose them. You know, so you've got to be quite careful. If you want a group to work and be sustained together, I mean, Maria and I, we work with beginning researchers on Sunday night, so we've got Skype with about 8 to 10 people each Sunday night. Before that, we've got a postdoctoral living theory group with about 6 people in it. And before that, the EJOT's editorial board. And again, it's those regular meetings that have sustained us over years. The NERI group here in Ireland, you'll see that if you get into the website, and I'll show you how to access that, you really do, I would advise you just to contact, you know, they've got the website where they can contact, so you can actually join with some of theirs. But they meet regularly. But these 4 women, they're quite, well, I just find them amazing. They have sustained their passion and work together. Very disparate personalities, different contexts. But in fact, 4 of them are now sharing things. I think it's at Maynooth University, as I say, with the master's programme. They've been quite active within your College of Teachers. You know, their work is now being taken seriously. Whereas when it started, you know, they would be dismissed. So it's a very difficult question, and I've only found that I got myself regular meetings, and the NERI group do as well. But it can be through Skype. Otherwise, I tend to lose the focus.
Just to follow on from that, then, if you do lose the community, or you know, and then you have to write up the report, we'll say, and you can't engage with them at that process, or you've lost the connection, are they still co-researchers because they were at a particular point in the life cycle?
Up to the point. Yeah. Up to the point you can actually genuinely claim they were co-researchers. And then you can analyse what actually in one sense goes wrong. Yeah? The way it happened with the living theory process, exactly that. A very successful doctoral student called Kevin Eames, I have his thesis on my webpage. He was the person who took the leadership role in his school for creating that collaborating group of practitioner researchers. Very successful, 2 to 3 years. We actually got advanced diplomas through, some got their master's degrees. Kevin was then recognised by the whole authority as having expertise, and he was seconded for 2 years to an assessment project with the authority. The actual school-based group then actually fell apart because that leadership was no longer being provided on that regular basis. But whilst it was in full flow, somebody from Canada, she was called Linda Grant, who was with the Ontario College of Teachers, visited what we were doing, liked it very much indeed, took the ideas back to Ontario and persuaded one of the key superintendents of school in a big board, Jackie DeLong, to register with me at Bath for her doctorate. And Jackie then took it forward in the Grand Erie board as a full superintendent. But at the place where it actually started, it had actually folded. But you can actually plot. You can actually plot. Well, up to this point, you know, we were co-researchers. This is what happened. And then sometimes things just actually fall apart. And that's part of not telling what's called the smooth story of self. In 1996, Mary McAteer had a beautiful article on teacher research in, I think it was Educational Action Research, or no, British Education Research Journal. And she said, look, there is a danger that action researchers tell what she called a smooth story of self. And she said this is far from the truth. You know, actually, there is often quite a lot of what we like to call narrative wreckage. Right? Now, that's often hidden, whereas what you'll see in most of the doctoral theses, they contain some of this narrative wreckage. You know, things actually went wrong. There were dreadful problems sometimes with the ethics committee. Sometimes the institution, you know, was blocking what wanted to be done. Now, I know there are ethical issues in this, but it's not to tell the smooth story of self. It's to actually acknowledge there is that narrative wreckage, things do fall apart. I acknowledge that as part of the research. Again, really important. And again, all you need to do is write, because I can give you that reference to Mary McAteer. It's a lovely paper. Yeah. Okay? Well, are you getting that sense, what I was meaning by a living curriculum? You know, you're actually creating that as you ask the questions. Hopefully I'm able to respond in a way that might be useful to you. And what is coming out with your learning is your living curriculum. But what I've got is my given curriculum, which I'm hoping there's parts of it that you find helpful. And I was asked a question, could you just go into the handout? I just want to point you to something. That's this one, yeah. And on the front page, you see, what I had hoped, and I hoped that you could get a sense, yes, sure, I think that's it hasn't been possible, but maybe if any of you have got time to browse over lunch, I was hoping that, for example, can you see these? They're online. This is online. It's actually the first in the Action Research .net. The first on the What's New section is today. And in today's handout, okay, so this is the handout. And you can go into any of these, because they're live, it's a free resource, and you can actually just download. So you asked me about some of the, if you like, the references. Now, I really like this one, the 2019, the Wiley Handbook in Education. So it's the Wiley Handbook of Action Research in Education. The top one is in Zubas Gerrit's Action Learning, Action Research, Genres and Approaches. The third one is also, it's about worldwide perspectives on actions. I did that with Bob Dick and Ernie Stringer. Now, the Dordrecht one, that second edition of the International Handbook of Self-Study, that is about to be published. There's a very nice one. It's actually now just been published. It's that fourth one, which is this one about, fifth one. It's about using task is that thinking actively in a social context, in living theory research, in explanations of educational influences in a global social movement. Okay, so that's only just been published, and you've got the draft there before the publication that you can access from that PDF file. And then that fifth one, no, it's the sixth one. I think you'd enjoy that because there have been researchers, mainly from South America, led theoretically by a guy who has got this fascinating idea, which I think we might relate to. And he's got this idea, it's not an easy one, but he calls it epistemicide. Okay? Epistemicide, by which he means the killing off of knowledges. And his whole book in 2014, I've done a review of it in eJobs. He actually talks about epistemologies of the South, and by that he's meaning the indigenous knowledges, like in South America, like with the Quechua and the Inca cultures, the language there. It's like again, I mentioned the Aborigines, the Maori traditions, also within Asia, you've got fascinating differences, like within Chinese culture. Some of you might have come across the Chinese notion of what they call qi, which is energy. Now, if you look at what you do, you can't do anything without a flow of energy. And yet, according to this guy, Vasiliuk, he said, look, we're incredibly weak in our understanding of placing energy with meaning, energy with values, and this idea of energy goes with motivation. You can't do anything. Hopefully I'm making sense here. But I don't think any of you would have brought in the importance of energy as an embodied expression that moves you into your research when you try to explain your influence. Now, this is why, again, these ideas of this guy was called De Souza Santos, the guy who did this work on epistemicide and the epistemologies of the South. But it's that idea of a knowledge democracy, that sixth reference there, how our action research is contributing to knowledge democracy, a global perspective. That's in educational action research. And again, those are really the most up-to-date references that I think you'll be able to get in terms of these processes that are down there. Okay?
Can you spell the name of the person who talked about epistemicide? Santos.
Yeah, he's called De Souza Santos. Yeah, I'll just... I think it's such an important idea. Okay, so again in the volume 92 of eJobs there, this is the review that I did of De Souza Santos, Epistemologies of the South, Justice Against Epistemicide. And in Ireland, do you remember what I mentioned about, what I noticed, this is when I first started coming over here 20 years ago, the groups that I was with, I was struck by a particular quality of community, that there was a relational dynamic, often at work in the room, and I've seen this with the NERI group, that actually should not be ignored when you're actually writing, because I think you'll find within your Irish culture, you've got a great strength in terms of community relations, about being together, and about, as I say, the importance of conversation between you all. And it's not to be ignored. And for you to recognise that and to bring it into your inquiry, because it's something I've often explored with the NERI researchers, to say, look, I do think you've got something really unique to bring into the global context. You know, because from Ireland, you could actually, I think, make this contribution from the quality of the relationships between them. When you're asking about the collaboration, when you're asking about, you know, just working together as co-researchers, when you talked about the care, bringing the voices of the vulnerable into a space, you know, where they can be heard. All of these are grounded, I think, in the quality of relationship that you could actually show people. And don't ignore the use of that technology, because I found that piece of technology of the digital, because you can actually play with it in quick time. You can move the cursor along very quickly, and hours and seconds you can do, and find these moments when there is energy being expressed, there are values that you can see, and you can actually integrate these within your texts, which we do in the Educational Journal of Living Theories. It's a multimedia journal, and lots of people are including brief video clips to communicate their meanings. And you have, I think, something which could do with bringing you more fully into the world, which is to do with the quality of relationships. And I do think this is a cultural strength within Ireland. But I think it's well worth thinking about and then seeing what it might be for you to bring that, as I think the NERI group are actually doing, if you get into their texts. I hope I'm making sense here, because, as I say, it's not being brought out at the moment. Just as I was saying that none of your work, apart from those on where you have your web page, I can't access it. And the reason I want to is that I'm going to these international conferences and saying, look, this is what is actually happening within Ireland. That a group, when you think of the embodied knowledge in this room, it's deep and extensive. When you think of your knowledge that you've built up over a lifetime of engagement in what you believe in, what you're practicing, and at the moment, most of it is embodied. It's in what you do. Now, what we need to, I think, to find a way of doing is making this public, sharing it, so other people can learn from it. And that's what I do believe your own living theory could help with. Okay? Sure? Okay. Now, what I've done, when I talked about the given curriculum, that it was just to try to help to show that if you go into that handout I've given, now the one on the web, you can just click and all of this comes out, so all of the links are live. Now, if you mention participatory research, you get at least half a dozen different responses about what is being meant by participatory. Now here is one that I like, which is from this guy, Henryk Skolimowski, from his book on the participatory mind. He calls it a mother's title, A New Theory of Knowledge and of the Universe. But he's got an aesthetic way, the poetic way of communicating. I'll just go down to the bottom, where he talks about a participatory research program. So main characteristics: empathy, communion, indwelling, imaginative hypotheses. And he says, some of these requirements seem to be almost too much for our minds trained in the rigours of objectivity. Yet surprisingly, most of these attributes of participatory research are not alien to us. We know them from our own personal experience. So if you would just bear that in mind in terms of, if you want to embrace that notion of being participatory, again, this is the language I have found resonates with me more than any other. And it doesn't stipulate definition of participatory action research, where everybody's asking the same question. It goes into the kind of the values base, and I love that. The participatory research is the art of empathy, the art of communion, the art of inquiry, and that is Henryk Skolimowski. And as I say, I wanted to draw you to that attention, that you can actually access that from, because it's different from the handout that you've got printed out, because we've got all the live links. And you'll see that if you go into that one, that brings you into my website, and you've got my email at the bottom there. Now, one of the other things, if you've nothing else that you want me to respond to, I was going to go on to showing you an approach that we've called living posters, which means you don't have to produce a 7,000 or 8,000 word paper. You can produce something which you find visually attractive, and I'll go through how you can actually put those into a space with others so that you can actually access what you're doing. But before I just ask that, just about the living posters, again, is there anything else that you're feeling, you just want me to take up? Because I much prefer that sense of a living curriculum which you are actually creating, and it is a co-creation, you're doing that together. But at the same time, there are certain things that I think you'd enjoy learning, knowing about, and one of them is this living posters. Anything else, or shall I just move on to,
Because I'm entirely new to this research area, would you mind just listing what the key principles are of this approach?
Yeah, I think I've already given you one about, if, as I did, I came to the idea of a living theory from those action reflection cycles. Yeah, so it was in 1976, and I produced a report of 6 teachers I was working with, and I produced a report explaining what we did using 3 of the most up-to-date theories of the day. Right? I've done theories of dissemination, theories of evaluation, theories of teaching and learning. Gave it to the teachers, 6 teachers I worked with for 18 months. And I got shocked because my academic colleagues had said how good this report was. Gave it to the teachers as a draft, and it was part of this validation process. And I was shocked when they said, yeah, Jack, we understand this report, but where are we in it? We cannot see ourselves in the report. We've understood how you use these theories. Would you please go back to the data, because I've gathered video data, interviews with the children, I've got accounts and stories. So I went back to the data. I'm working with one of the teachers, who was a GCE student of mine in the year before. I constructed a report which looked nothing like the first one, and it was intuitive in going back to the data and just reconstructing it in terms of what I thought we had done, how to explain it. And they all agreed that this was great because they could see themselves in the report. And when I looked at the form of it, I didn't realise, as I was doing it, it had the action reflection cycle form. I'd gone through the problems we experienced, what concerns did we have, I documented our imagined way forward, what did we choose to do, as we acted, what data did we gather to make a judgment, as we evaluated, did we use the data to make that judgment about how effective we were being, and then I produced a valid explanation of the influences we were all having. Are you with me? That was my first understanding of action reflection cycles, which came out intuitively of the research with the teachers. So the teachers showed me actually that is what they were doing to improve their practice, using that action reflection cycle. So that is the first characteristic in terms of the action research approach. Now, why I actually coined the idea of a living educational theory came out of the action research approach, because I was asking, how do I improve my practice? When I'd gone through that report with the teachers, what I saw was that it wasn't sufficient. The how questions are all about the way in which you improve something. If you try to explain your influence, it's going further than giving a description of how you did something. I hope I'm making sense there. That the how question, which is how do I improve, But then you've got why questions, which give the reasons of why certain things happened in the way they did. And the reason that I coined this idea of a living educational theory, which is a very simple idea, but it challenged the dominant view of the day, it was that you and I can actually generate our own explanations of our educational influence in our own learning, in the learning of others. It could be our students, it could be colleagues, and this is important, in the learning of the social formations that influence our practice and understandings. And that last one, for example, it was in 2000, I think it was about 6, 7, I was on the University Senate, and the working party was set up about looking at how research degrees could be submitted. And up to that point, no e-media were allowed to be submitted. So 4 of us put forward our recommendations to the Senate. I was amazed because I've been arguing this for several years. And it went through without any question at all. And it was that from now on, e-media can be accepted in research submissions. And that opened the way for these digital visual data to be included within doctoral and master's theses. Now, that idea that you can explain your educational influences in your own learning, and importantly, in the learning of others, and then the learning of the social formation, which that was an example of how we changed the whole university's regulations to actually allow something to take place that up to that point wasn't allowed. That's showing the educational influence in a social formation. Now, I coined the idea that your explanation of your practice and mine, of those educational influences, is what I call the living educational theory. And the reason I called it a living educational theory was going back to what that Soviet logician, Ilyenko, asked. If an object exists as a living contradiction, what must the thought be that expresses it? And my thought was, well, look, I am a living contradiction, but I am explaining my educational influences, and I will call that a living educational theory. Right? That's how it emerged. And then it's been legitimated through these doctorates in different universities around the world. But those are the 2 main characteristics that I would say, if you are engaging in action research, then the action reflection cycle seems to me to be a basic characteristic of all forms of action research. If you actually want to generate a living educational theory, the characteristic is it's an explanation of your educational influence in your own learning, the learning of others, and the learning of the social formations that influence your practice and understandings. And you can draw insights from theories and other methodologies into the generation of your living theory. So it doesn't deny the value of traditional forms of understanding. Like Habermas, I use those criteria of Habermas in relation to validity. I use Richard Winter. Michael Polanyi, have you come across Michael Polanyi's work in personal knowledge? It's beautifully influenced me. This was a 1958 book, and it was called Towards a Post-Critical Philosophy, and the phrase, he said, understand the world from your own point of view, as an individual claiming originality and exercising your judgment responsibly with universal intent. Now, that idea that you can understand the world, are you with me, from your own point of view, as an individual claiming originality and exercising your judgment responsibly with universal intent, is what shifted me into personal knowledge from being a positivist scientist. My first degree was in physics and chemistry. It was a joint honours physics and chemistry, and I came out as a teacher full of key ideas. There's only one form of knowledge. It was actually scientific knowledge, and I had to operate with a controlled experimental design with treatment groups. I think that might be familiar to you. Now, that's how I got my master's degree in psychology. I used that kind of methodology as a positivist scientist, and it then struck me as not being appropriate. That's when I started to work with the teachers. They showed that action reflection cycle is systematic, it can be rigorous, you can build in the validation processes, which as a scientist really satisfied me. But I didn't have to go with a controlled experimental design. So I think those 2 qualities which you're asking, how do you be very clear about how to distinguish? Yeah? Anything else that you feel that you need covering? Have I covered what I was asked? Have I covered the...
Sorry, because you mentioned the second point, the key characteristic of the living educational theory is your characteristic influences. So how is that different from, you know, something else you already mentioned, like autoethnography?
Yeah. And if I just show you how you can access, I tried to work through quite a detailed answer, to that question. Yeah. What I did for all my doctoral students, in that living theory doctoral proposals, what I've done also, you might enjoy those, but those there are doctoral proposals and transfer papers that you can actually get into and just have a look. I could send you the ethics papers from Ariana Briganti, and there's one that's just gone through from a psychotherapist called Margaret Wadsley, and they've just gone through the ethics committee. And the papers are really interesting. How do you get these proposals through an ethics committee? Yes, I'll see you later. Yeah. But the one that you can get to is at the bottom here. It's just that if you go into that, yeah, okay, I'll see you later. Bye-bye. So what I've got is issues to do with, you go into these values, the issues of validity, the notions of the multimedia explanations, and I'll bring up later where I've gone through the answer to that question about all of these different kinds of methodologies that I think you might find helpful if you write a research proposal. Because you'll all be asked questions about methodology. It's obviously, and this guy Creswell, he's got a lovely book, but he did it on narrative research, phenomenology, grounded theory, ethnography, and case studies, right? And said, you've got to choose between one of these. That was his big message in his book. Now you can imagine, because I was claiming that each living theory researcher generates their own living theory methodology, you don't choose one at the beginning, you actually find your own way through to a valid explanation of your inference. So I've given what he said, Ellis and Poplar's ideas on autoethnography, G. McNick and myself on action research and living theory research, and Tight's ideas in phenomenography. But what I've done is I've gone through each of those and I've actually explained what each one does, the importance of methodological inventiveness, and then gone through these narrative research, phenomenological, grounded theory research, ethnographic, case study. And then I've gone through how, with action research, and then into the autoethnography, but also I've said, in terms of the living theory, how these distinctions are clear in terms of what distinguishes a case study, what distinguishes autoethnography, and also then what distinguishes a living theory approach to research. So, again, I found that a really important question to be clear, because you will be asked the questions about methodology. Or if you start to just become familiar, what are the main characteristics that define these different methodologies? You can then, I think, easily respond to any questions that you're asked about, well, why choose living theory methodology? And you could say, well, actually, we don't choose a methodology before we start. We actually create our own as we build a valid explanation of our educational influence in our practice.
Okay, I'm sorry, what is this paper called?
Which one?
The one that's up here?
What were you saying?
The title?
What is the title?
The whole lot.
Yeah.
Well, the whole lot of it is justifying your creation of a living theory methodology in the creation of your living educational theory. So
that was accessed at the bottom of the first page?
Do you mean this one? This is.
But where is it accessed from?
Okay, yeah, you access that. I'll show you. Yeah. So I'll go back so you can actually access it. I'll go back through this. So,
notes.
yeah, but it's actually in this. If I just start from which one you should just be able to get into. You should just be able to get into. There's the actual research document. It would be nice if you all just clicked on the Facebook and you felt, you could actually get in there and just leave. I think Joy Mount, who coordinates it, just needs to accept you. But it would be nice if you actually put something in there.
It's a Living Theory Research Facebook group. So in case you think it is just Jack's family page.
Are you okay with this? You go into action research now, into living theory thesis for doctoral educators. That's the one that's got all of the doctoral theses. The same column, one above it. So these are all the proposals, supervisions, and then at the bottom you've got these notes for masters and doctoral pattern. So that brings up the paper about the methodology.
It's also in your book, Jack.
Yeah, this book, there's quite a lot about it, just out, it was the latest of 2018, yeah. It's Living Theory Research as a Way of Life, so I tried to answer those issues in that text.
It's the last chapter.
Yeah.
You're not good at actually saying about what you've got in your book, which I think these guys would actually find very helpful.
Marie goes, wow, because I often forget that I've got them there.
Yeah, save us carrying them back. Anybody wants one? 10 quid to you rather than 15.
Thank you. It's a great publicist. So that gives you access. Yeah? You'd have that in hard copy, but you've also got free access through these. Before I go on again, that sense of the given curriculum, is there anything else that you're now feeling, is there anything that I haven't answered fully, or you don't feeling?
Feeling a bit overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed.
In a good way.
Right, good.
In a good way.
But what I'd like just to feel to hold on to is that thing about the planner is, I could bring it up again, that you can download. I used to print them off. I used to give them out for the, when I was first beginning a group. And I would ask people just to fill it in. It only takes about 15 minutes. Then to talk with a partner, to swap it. And so people got a sense, as you did at the beginning, about the values. Because if you've got a group, they'll all have a practice, they'll all be engaged, they'll all be able to relate to those questions, and they'll also then be able to talk together in a group. So I'll put it up, before, maybe after dinner. I'll just have it there because I'd like you very much just to feel, oh yeah, I can ask them, And if anybody else is just feeling, well, what can I go away with that I can actually work with? Because there is there is literally 50 sheets of stuff here. And my website is my archive. That is my data archive. And I can point people to, it's not organised for a reader, It's for me to point to, you can go into this for this.
Sorry, I don't want to dominate the discussion, but just one very quick question, and that is an approach that I didn't see listed in that particular article that you put up. And you already mentioned Dewey. How does all of this differ from a pragmatist approach? From a pragmatist approach?
Well, the two people, Pearce and Dewey, who are usually known for creating pragmatism, I think it was about the 1880s, 1890s. Let me give this. In one sense, it doesn't differ from it. That if you go into Dewey's, it's quite a complex text, which is about logic, the theory of inquiry. And I don't want to confuse you here, but the idea of logic, I told you that Aristotle had a particular logic, eliminating contradiction. The dialecticians had a different logic which embraced contradiction. And it goes back to a debate between Aristotle and Plato. And Plato actually managed to succeed in controlling the academy. Aristotle gained control of the first academy, and you can see that logic now dominates Western universities. It dominates the research journals, that idea. Now the dialecticians, they're legitimate, but it's nowhere near as dominant as... Now Dewey and Peirce came along, and they had this notion of pragmatism, and again it's really important, this idea of use value. But what you do is you try to work on an approach literally that works. You know, so that's why that action reflection cycle, if you go back to what Dewey is advocating, it's no different than the action reflection cycle. So in that sense, it is a pragmatic. That's how I learned. It had use value, you know, to most teachers I worked with. And that's where it's the same, if you like, as Dewey's logic of inquiry. Now, where that sense of living theory differs from the pragmatism as having use value is that in pragmatism there is no necessary condition for you to generate a valid explanation of your educational influence in learning. Whilst Dewey had a lot of really good stuff to say, one of the things that he didn't do was generate, in relation to his own educational influences in learning, a valid explanation which he could share. So where it differs from pragmatism, it has at its heart a pragmatic research method, you know, that systematic action reflection cycle, which, in my language, that was a pragmatic solution to my work with those teachers. Where I think it goes further than the pragmatism, and I've got to be careful here because the guy Habermas, whose work I like a lot, he described his work as universal pragmatism. Whereas if you generate your own explanation, you're not imposing it on anybody else. You're actually creating, as a knowledge creator, a valid explanation which you offer to others, and it's just so happens. You go to my website, you look at where people in Pakistan, Nepal, in Australia, they have acknowledged that they've taken insights from the living theories on the web that came out of Bath University, and they've used those in creating their own. So there is a pragmatism at the heart of this process, but in generating your own living theory, you'll see that Dewey and not Peirce actually explicitly created that kind of explanation. But that's where I would see it as different. But it embraces it, because that's really important.
So the difference is in the sharing, is that what you mean?
Well, no, it's in the making public your explanation of your educational influence. It's not just the sharing, because you've got those in common. That research, according to Stenhouse, is systematic inquiry that is made public. And that's really important for it to be research. You produce something, share it, so it can be open to what we call the mutual rational control of critical discussion. That's one of the great things about these processes of validation.
Yeah.
And that comes with you.
But Dewey also talks about the community of inquiry, so it is a kind of collaborative participation.
Oh, absolutely. Again, that was another great strength, you know, the community of inquiry.
Yeah.
But inquiry is literally just asking questions.
Okay.
Now, I found this really strange when I read this very famous scholar from the last century, Hans Georg Gadamer. Truth and Method was this major text, and I was very shocked. I was shocked when I read this. He had this beautiful section on the logic of question and answer. The logic of question and answer, which goes back about 2,500 years, you know, to Socrates. And he said this guy Collingwood had gone further than anybody else, and Collingwood in 1949 produced his autobiography. It's got a beautiful chapter 5 on the question and answer. Now the problem is that Gadamer points out, he said, well, despite Plato, we're still not ready for a logic of question and answer. Okay, just hold that in mind. Despite that, we are still not ready yet for a logic of question and answer. Now, that's where I think we can help things to move forward, because from inquiry, and as I said, strength for me of the Irish, even a sense of citizenship or community, you have got a way of being together which I think support each other's inquiries. Now, I believe you could actually have a greater influence if you were to create your own living theories as explanations of your influence and spread those more widely, using what Dewey was talking about, a community of inquiry, very, very important. So, yeah.
I'm just wondering, I haven't read a lot of these, but do the educational influences, does it come right back to personality and traits and values, as you say, that they're actually more about the person than educational theory in the end of the day.
Well, they're definitely grounded in what you've just said. So your educational theory, and what I was wanting to do, and I hope, let me just see if I can manage this before. Where's my great timekeeper? What when we're packing for lunches? Right, okay, yeah. Immediately after lunch, what I'd like very much to do is to give you just 5-10 minutes each to really get into that kind of question, which is very much to do about values, and to look at how you create your own explanation, and I'm calling your living theory, from the ground of your values. Okay? But what I want to try to show you is that your values and you do not exist apart from within what we call an ecology of knowledges, or what Bateson called an ecology of mind. That is, as I'm standing here, you might not be, again, aware, but I'm giving up the carbon dioxide. I'm taking in the oxygen. I'm actually in a network. For me, even to exist as a human being, even to have life, I exist within an amazing interrelated network of influences. You do as well, but also in terms of your culture. So you have been influenced by your values, maybe from the home, maybe from relation, from the workplace. And those connect with your cultural values as well. And what I want to do is to try to show you how you can bring in a connection between what might appear to be unique and almost unreplicable values that you hold in what I call your constellation of values. The values that help you to create yourself and who you are. Yet at the same time, those have not emerged in a vacuum. That you have imbibed quite a number of those values from the culture in which you live, from others, from close relations. And I want very much to look at that relational dynamic between them. And the reason for doing this is that the recent doctorates that are now being prepared for living theory, they all now focus on the question that you're asking, which is, until 1996, I believed that all I had to do to build an explanatory principle was be clear about it. Okay? So, one of mine was academic freedom. Passionate about academic freedom. And I believed in my book 93 book, I clarified what I meant by academic freedom. And I thought that was it. I thought all I had to do was to clarify the meaning of my value and then use it as an explanatory principle. Now, one of my PhD students at the time was called Moira Laidlaw, and she got hers in 1996, her doctorate. And she pointed out to me that, actually, Jack, it's not just a matter of clarifying your values, like you were talking about your values earlier. It's actually a case of seeing that your values themselves are living and capable of evolving. Now, that has informed all of the living theory theses that then came from there. Because it wasn't just a matter of clarifying your fundamental values, it was actually showing that in practice, they could actually evolve and learn themselves living. Now, the way we moved it on from a single value as an explanatory principle was recognising when people started to put forward love, joy, hope, compassion, they were pointing out that as a person with a personality, they were constituted by their own unique constellation of values that were in what is called a relationally dynamic relationship. So if you believe passionately in freedom, as I did academic freedom, actually, sometimes in terms of responsibility, for you to exercise absolute freedom, it gets in the way because other people, are you with me? If you exercise freedom without recognising your responsibility towards others, you can damage others. So there are this relational dynamic between your values that we can now bring into your living theory accounts and show how these interact over time to explain what it is you're doing and the influence you're having. Yeah? Now, what I like to do after lunch is to come back, and it will be kind of 10 minutes each in pairs, but it's actually to see if we can get closer now for you to articulate, and from that embodied sense, from the visceral, from what you actually feel moves you, and how we might bring those into a valid explanation of your influence, both in your own learning, but in the learning of others. Are you okay with this? And it might be the last one, which I sometimes don't push it when I first introduce something, but I do think that idea that we can influence a social formation like a school or a university or a culture or the council of teachers, I do think that you can do that. The NERI group are demonstrating it. They've got some beautiful illustrations now of how their work has influenced what's happened in the College of Teachers. But I'd like to start with your values, articulating them so we can be a bit clearer, that unique constellation, into explanatory principles of your influence, and then how to explain your influence in the learning of others. And if we have time, we can move on to the idea of social formation, which is really crucial. But please don't hesitate, as I say, if you would, again, I'd like to start when we come back after lunch, just by raising that, has anything sparked up anything else in your minds? Because for me, it's been your questions, which I've really appreciated, and that gives me, if you like, it's the responsiveness which then allows me to connect. So I'm not just doing a given curriculum, because I spent most of my early life in teaching, simply transmitting a given curriculum. And it took me about 4 or 5 years to recognise that all I was doing was imposing. And it was I believed in scientific understanding, but it took me some time to realise I should be encouraging inquiry learning at the ground of scientific inquiry than just transmitting the syllabus. And my teaching approach changed. I still got the kids through the examinations, like I've done with my master's students and doctoral students. But it's been done, I think, through a process of education inquiry, where the person is coming to understand themselves better and the actual influence they're having on the work. So please, after lunch, if there's anything that sparked of interest, and we'll talk together, I'll start with that just to ask if there's anything else. Are we okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. That's enough on lecture. Does it tell you? No. Close it down. Something about connecting with each other, because Helena, doing work and research here in DCU, didn't know that John Connolly has recently been awarded his doctorate at DCU, for that programme. But when you have a look at the pages that I put in my handout for you, you'll see that he's actually explicitly done this whole section on participatory action research. And that question that I was asked about the pragmatism, John has actually analysed the methodological processes which are underpinned by pragmatism. Looking at the fact that this is going on here, and you now know that John's doctorate is in the archive here, and it'd be well worth, as I say, just connecting with, to say, actually you've got somebody who's used a participatory approach within the health service to bring together two completely separate diagnostic processes.
John Connolly, did you say?
Yes, he manages the Healthy Living Centre here.
Okay.
At DCU. Just across the Serbian.
Yeah, just let me see if I can. I've got the whole thing here. It's actually the whole thesis is possibility. So there's
one there.
There he is. Yeah.
Healthy Living Centre. Healthy Living Centre.
So, this university has already supervised, supported a whole doctorate which has been submitted successfully, and it was about, as I say, developing a comprehensive, integrated and contemporary recovery-oriented dual diagnostic service within the environment of primary and continuing care in Cork. But as I said, I think it was that section explicitly on the participatory approach. I think it was pages 88 to 95, which, as I said, I've documented in your handbook, so you should just be able to access these, which again might just excite you to make connections with people that are local. Yeah? You know, because there's something about, as I said, the knowledge in this room that I'm hoping it's almost like you'll permit me to start to enable this to become more public, more well-known, more recognised in terms of the knowledge, embodied knowledge in this room as you make it public. And what I'm hoping, as the list goes down, you'll see, but if you want to just see if this is possible to build over time an interest in each other's research that is supportive of what you're doing, and you are supportive of others, there's a list coming around just asking for your emails, and there was something else about the research, wasn't it? It's really clear you want it, don't you?
If anybody hasn't, they don't have to, but if anybody'd like to give us the email, and if you're on LinkedIn or anything, then just make a note on there and we can follow up with you.
Okay, what I'd really like you to do now is, just first of all, in pairs, it's to give each other, and I say it's just 10 minutes each, and after 10 minutes I'll just ask you to make sure that you've actually switched so that you're getting the equivalent amount of time. And I'd just like you to explore together some of the values that are really motivating you. You began doing that, when you isolated care, you isolated the voices of the vulnerable. But what I'd like to try and get at now is what we call your ontological values. These are the values that give meaning and purpose to your life, and that you actually bring into what you do. They motivate you and have sustained you over years of inquiry. And over time, I'd just like you to explore together and just ask, if you like, each other's questions, just to see if you can get that better understanding of what the person is really motivated by. But if you would try to do it from that embodied sense, so as you're engaging with the person, don't just listen to the words that are used, see if you can connect with the embodied expression of the energy and the values that are connected. Am I making sense there? Because I could talk about value words like freedom, justice, they can trip off my tongue. But if I'm being asked to account for myself in terms of how I have lived academic freedom, I would have to give you the stories of what I encountered at the university, which was actually constraining my academic freedom. And then you get a real sense of the embodied meaning of the values that give meaning and purpose to my life. Could I just ask if that's clear, what I'd like you to do? Is just give another person, as I say, that attention and question. So see if you can get at that ontological sense. Okay, where is this person coming from in terms of what is motivating them to sustain what it is they're doing, both in their life and research. And in 10 minutes, I'll just ask you to make sure that you've actually given each other at the same time to ask you to switch around. And if you're on your own just at the moment, could you make sure you get with some? Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, that would work, I think. And if there's one in, just to do, 3 of you could actually join. Is that right? Yeah, okay. That's great. Okay. Trying to explain how you can use the values that really are motivating. How you can use those as explanatory principles in an explanation of your influence. It's what moves this kind of conversation where you're talking about the values to somebody else into an academic and accredited program, either for masters or for doctorates. And it gets beyond reasonable doubt that these are valid explanatory principles, which can be used in my language epistemologically, because every doctorate has got to be an original contribution to knowledge, every master's degree has got to make a contribution to knowledge, and if you're adopting this approach, then it's bringing your unique constellation of values as explanatory principles into those explanations. And that's what living theory. And what I want to do is to just, for a few minutes, just go through how you might do this. And I'll use my own living theory research in the here and now as an example of what I'm working on to do that myself. And then I want to go into what we call living posters to show you how you might, if you wished, produce your own living poster, and I'll demonstrate largely through the work that Marie did about how there are these groups all the way around the world that have submitted their living posters, and you can access those and, if you want, engage in a dialogue with them. You know, it'll sound a bit strange if you like, but if you take the Mongolian Action Research Group, now, they've actually put in their living posters, and until they did, we hadn't heard of the Mongolian Action Research Group, but now they're very active. They're hoping to come to the Classroom Action Research, the Collaborative Action Research, the CALM and the ALARA. I don't know if you know that initially, but it's called the Action Learning Action Research Association. That's ALARA. CALM is the Collaborative Action Research Network. They're having a joint conference in Split in October, and I'll give you the details because we've just heard that about 5 of us that are going together will have our proposals accepted, and we show these home pages of living posters. So if you were actually up there as a DCU contingent of practitioner researchers, we could actually show what was actually going on here in terms of your own inquiries. That's if you wish to, but I'll show you how you could actually do that if you wanted to. Before I do that, I just want to give you an example of this idea of using your what we call ontological values as explanatory principles. Now, to comprehend what I'm doing in the here and now, and how this is part of my own living theory research, I think we need to understand that one of my concerns is that, as yet, and this is living theory researchers, haven't been as influential in what I call a global social movement as we could have been. Now, for 20 or 30 years, I focused at the University of Bath on one thing and one thing only, and that was to demonstrate that it's going to be possible to get doctoral theses accredited, living theory doctoral theses accredited in a university. That was my sole focus of my research. And between 1996 and 2009, or 2012 rather, so that was 16 years, I had 32 doctoral theses that I personally supervised, accredited successfully by the University of Bath. So that was 2 per year over 16 years, which was higher than any other member of staff. Okay, so I actually, to my satisfaction, having a tenured appointment, so I couldn't be got rid of, I was able to dedicate myself to something I really believed in. Now, I can demonstrate that, it was successful, but that was just to accredit the doctorates of living theory practitioner researchers. Then, my interest changed because I wanted to spread the influence through global conversations of these living theories. And that has continued to be the focus of my concern. So I went over to Cartagena for the Action Research Network of the Americas 3 years ago. I did a similar thing in Toronto for the CALM ALARA conference. It's Montreal at the end of this month for the Action Research Network of the Americas conference again. Then it's DERA in Manchester in September, and then Split in Croatia in October. And the focus is not to get accreditation for the doctorates, although that's still important to me. I've still got 5 doctorates that I'm helping to supervise at the University of Cumbria. My primary concern in the here and now is, can I stimulate you to bring your knowledge into some of these networks which are working globally, and I'll show you the living theory posters, that your inquiry could become part of and connected with, so that what you're in, for example, in coaching, you know, the work we were talking about at lunchtime in terms of health visiting, how could I encourage what your research interests are on the list that I've got, can not only get accreditation if you wanted it in terms of living theory or in whatever way you wanted to do this, but could I somehow bring the values that you hold and the relational dynamic of what you're doing into these global conversations so that your values can be seen to be influencing on a wider basis than within the local or the national? Am I making sense? So this is what you can hold me accountable to. In other words, what I'm trying to do in the here and now, when I go into the living posters, and also when I show you the living poster of the Network Educational Action Research Ireland, and to encourage you to connect with Marion Glenn, Bernie Sullivan, Mary Roach, Catriona MacDonald, and also Pip Bruce Ferguson. Those four there, I'll bring them up because each have got their own individual living poster. And this Pip is from New Zealand. She worked here at DCU, and then she's been supporting the Nearing Network, and they've got another meeting, I think, in a fortnight. But what I'd like very much to do is to encourage you to connect and for them to see what you're doing in terms of developing your living poster and then sharing it with us, and we'll share it with the homepage. There are over 100 on there, Maria, that we've now got. Different parts of the world, researchers like the Nearing group in Ireland that are now working and communicating and sharing their ideas with a global context in mind. That your values, they're not just individual ones, although they help to develop and constitute who you are, but you think, if these were brought more fully into the world, I would suggest the world becomes a better place to be. And I think in Ireland, as I said, I think you do have something quite unique and special which comes over in community. I think you've got a way in conversations and in community that you can actually bring more fully into the world, which could have an influence on making the world a better place to be. Could I just check if I've understood what it would be for you to hold me accountable? So I've stated my value of attempting to move from the accreditation process for the living theory thesis, so I'm still working on that, to a point where there's something I don't really know how to do. Okay? And it's how might I encourage you all to make this contribution, through a living poster, to bring your research and inquiry more fully into the world. So if you like, when I go to Montreal at the end of this month, when I go to Split in Croatia, that I can actually show what it is you're actually doing. Now at the moment, I can recognise faces, and because we've had a short talk briefly about what you're doing, I've got that sense. Yeah? Well, at Elena, at lunchtime, came and we had a talk, and I got a little bit of a sense about what Elena's interested in. But if I look now, I don't really know what you're doing. Now, on your living poster, you can put either a brief video for 3 minutes. I can have your photograph, and it helps me to connect. We've talked. I've now got your name. I can put to a face. I want to go much further than that. I want to know, did you actually manage to start, on the ground with that group to begin this kind of process? So that would then be part of me being accountable for what I say that I'm actually trying to do. And it's linked to the belief that what you have in this room in terms of your embodied knowledge, if made more public and shared, would help the world to become a better place to be, because your values would be shared and lived more fully. So that's helped me. You holding me to account. And what I'd like to do is just see if I can get a sense of what it would be. For example, the partner that you were talking with, or the threesome. What would it be for the other person in that conversation to hold you accountable for living the values that you've actually been talking about more fully in your practice? What would count as evidence that you'd actually been living those values and attempting to live them as fully as possible within your practice and research? Have we got that kind of... Because that's a focus of the living theory research and the action research, that is making public your explanation of your influence. But to do that, it's got to be an evidence-based explanation. And it goes back to, how are you demonstrating that you're living your values as fully as possible? Now, when I've asked about that, I'm going to look at some of this work where these people, Bernie and Mary and the others, in 2006 and 2007, they got their doctorates from Limerick University, and every one of them had living theory in the title. So it's the very first group of living theory researchers, all working and supporting each other that got their doctorates accredited. So that first phase, if you like, was successful, demonstrating living theory research in Ireland could be accredited. Now they've gone further than that in helping to create Educational Action Research Ireland, and you can contact them, by going into any one of these, will bring you up with their living posters. And this is the kind of living poster that I'm suggesting that you could actually produce, which shows, like with Marion puts her values, she describes what she's doing about supervisor and program designer, self-study action research. She's been a primary school teacher and principal. She's co-authored 4 books, and the last one is just out. We put a review in today's, when it's been published today, you'll see it in Education Action Research. And there's a lovely review by Jackie DeLong of their latest book, Introduction to Critical Reflection and the Learning Communities in Educational Partnerships. Okay, so that is a living poster. And what I want just to again show you is that you can go into actionresearch.net and you'll see Marion is connected to all of these groups. The NERI homepage, the EJOTS, that's the Educational Journal of Living Theories, and the previous poster. And if you go, you can get this directly from the What's New section of my website, you can go into the homepage of Living Posters. Now, the text may be a bit small for you, but here you've got all the way around the world. You've got Blue Water Action Research Network. This is in Canada. You've got EJOTS, you've got the Mongolian Research Group, University of Cambridge, Conversation Cafe. And then you've got some individuals, Getza Ribaldo. Now, Getza's interesting because she's in Venezuela. And at the moment, I'm following it with Majura and Guido in terms of the battles that are taking place. And then there's Getza actually having to face this tension on the streets of Caracas. That's her real living process at the moment. That's the tension. The last thing she sent through as her living poster was actually the street battles going on. That's her reality at the moment. But you get from each of these, Lee Scott is in South Africa. You see, Delicia Tim is also in South Africa. But you've got here all the way around the world, different people. Leslie Woods in South Africa. Again, Roy Pugh is a philosopher in Australia that's supervising about 13 doctoral students. Make a Move, that's one that Marie's involved in. Again, it's variety, because this is a group of women who've been experiencing postnatal depression. This Make a Move is almost like a dance therapy group, and it's got very good funding to actually support the well-being of the women that have been going through this experience. But do you get the idea of what you can actually get from here? That each individual has got their own, as I say, I showed you with the NERI one, that you can produce your own story, my story. So she was studying under Margaret Farrow here at Dublin City University, Jean McNiff as supervisor, and currently I'm engaged in sharing education research as co-founder of NERI. So I'm suggesting that you can access the people here, because they're actually your compatriots. I mean, they're actually local. Marion's worked at DCU. She's actually lecturing at the moment at Maynooth University, a master's program on these ideas. So I really do, I'm just hoping that I can encourage you to actually see you can connect with these people, these groups, and they will be really interested in your own inquiry, especially if you're getting something going. Because a lot of people are wondering at the moment, how do we get these things going? Marion and those other 3 women are wondering, how do they support other tutors that have now got students that want to do living theory research? How can they promote and show an understanding how to do this? And you're beginning, to get that just underway. Now, with this idea of the living posters, I'll show you how you can access the descriptions of, if you like, just guidelines of how to do this. Because honestly, I think once you see that you've all got the necessary competences to do this, and then to actually send them this. And what Marie does with the homepage, she would create a DCU, from this excuse me, conference, and you would be up there with some of the details, like the Education Action Research Group is, that we could then connect with. Because I'm very aware, I don't understand almost anything about the research, that you're doing. I've got the details, just on this, but it's allowing you and get your voice actually heard, because your questions have been superb that you've been asking me, and you can raise those in your own living poster. Okay? We'll come back to that. But what I'd now like you to do, please, is to go further than just sharing with someone a meaning of the fundamental values that really matter to you, that you will be accountable to. It could be in a month, it could be a year. This one from Bolivia, as I say, it was 3 years on since I gave the workshop, and he's produced this fantastic report, which acknowledges what he did within the workshop and how it's informed. This report that he's produced is a professor at St. Thomas University in Cochabamba in Colombia. Now, you could in Bolivia. Now, these are the kind of things I'd like us to just focus on a moment, with the idea that you could actually think about what evidence would you need, and that's linked, as I said, with data. You collect data which you can then use as evidence in an explanation. So if you're holding each other to account for the values that you've heard the person clarifying for you, now, what would be evidence that they had actually been seeking to live that value or those values as fully as they can? That's the action research and the living theory process. Okay, so we clarify, so we've got some understanding, which is what you've done. But then we move it further than that, and you start to be accountable to yourself and others in what we call evidence-based explanations. You will explain your influence now, your educational influence in your own learning. Just focus on that for the moment. What would it be for you to be able to show evidence that you have been trying to live these fundamental values of yours as fully as possible? So the other person you've been talking with, and I know there are a couple of groups of three, you should now be able, I think, just to start to question each other in terms of the context and their research. Okay, what would I need to look for in a month or 2 months? Longer than that is rather too long, because you'll suffer from data overload. You're much better accounting for yourself within about 5 or 6 weeks of the last one, how well it's going, or what the explanation is that you're producing in your own learning. But can I just ask, am I making sense of what I want you to explore together? It's what would each of you need to see as evidence that the other person was actually living their values as fully as they can? Yeah.
So sorry, are we talking future oriented or?
No, it's not. Well, you could do that, because the past, to make sense of the present, you evaluate your past, but to make sense of the present, like I was just doing with you, then projecting into the future, which doesn't yet exist, but you can hold me accountable for living those values. Do you want to go to Montreal or to Split or wherever it is? Yeah? So you can, and sometimes it's really good to start with some of the history. Can I explain my influence with my values, with literally the evidence base I've already got, the historical thing? If you're asked that question, where could you produce the evidence from? Yeah? If you're now thinking from the now, projecting to the future, what would you need to show in a month or a year that you have been trying to live the values that really matter to you as fully as possible? And what would your need to see as part of that sense of a validation group that is what you have been doing? And that is you producing, in my language, your own living theory. You are explaining your educational influence with the values as explanatory principles. But we would need to see the evidence that that is what you were doing. So you can draw on your own history, where you could show that you can explain some of your past and your influence with the evidence you already got, or you could explain to your partner what would it be now projecting forward for you to gather that data to use as evidence. Are you okay with this? Don't go on until you feel clear, because this is really important as producing your own living theory. It's right at the heart of you producing your own living theory. So do ask if you're not clear about what I'm asking you to do. Are you sure? Don't hesitate. Are we okay? Well, come back to me, if you're feeling that that's not clear. Okay, so silent. In my teaching, I never experienced that within schools. But could I just ask, before I go on to, if I show you how I would judge my influence by taking you into the Living Theory poster homepage, and then showing what it would be for you to create your own, and how I would evaluate my effectiveness to see whether or not I could encourage you to present yours to myself or other lady, and then we could get them up onto the homepage section, because that would then enable me to feel that I could spread the influence of some of your research. But can I just check, has anybody got that sense of clarity as you were talking about what kind of evidence, if you like, might you need to see which would show that your partner is actually trying to live the values that they claim to hold? Am I making sense there? Has anybody got any sense at all about what that kind of evidence might be? Do you want to try your nodding?
Yeah, Sheila here is an amazing multitasker. I know from talking to her. I think she did her doctorate and her cert and a diploma all alongside together, so that shows excellent work ethic. And I hope you don't mind me saying, she's going for surgery on Friday. She said her plans are to work away on her project now during her rest and recuperation stage, which I'm fairly sure she shouldn't be doing, but that would demonstrate that she is living to her values of work ethic and keeping the show on the road.
Good. Okay, yeah, that's the kind of thing that I'm interested in. Now, when you talk about your work ethic, one of the difficulties just by taking work ethic is that many people who learned how to destroy humanity had a very powerful work ethic.
I am that soldier. But then I'll call it passion instead.
I am that soldier.
Yes, I am that soldier. Now, that's the question that I would come back with, even with passion, because your passion can be mobilised for actually, anti-humane activities. Yeah. So, do you have anything, within the notion of the work ethic that can bring what Eric Fromm used to talk about and to say that we've got to make a decision to understand the world? That was Polanyi, and then Fromm said, look, you've got to really work out this idea that if you can face the truth without panic, there is no purpose to life other than that which you give to your own life through your own loving relationships and productive work. And he had a particular notion of what it was to be productive. And it's linked to what Ortrand Zubiscaret is talking about in this quote, which this is where we can hold Ortrand to account, and not just in relation to, but if you just very quickly have a read of that, because Ortrand, as one of the most influential international action researchers, she got an award recently from the Australian government for her contributions, to the action research movement. It's a really influential award that she got. But this is her recent insight, that she's saying, look, we should treat what we're doing today in relation to learning conferences, that it's not only learning, it's also development. So we should treat what we're doing today within a conference as a site for learning and development. But Ortrand, for most of her working life, has been very influenced by critical theory. Now, you look at this as her recent insight, that she's arguing we need to shift away from the mindset of neoliberalism and reductionism. Okay, so it's that notion that we, just to go with a capitalist form of economic rationality, actually leads to demoralisation and devaluation. Driving its obsession with consumerism, power and control. Now, this is what she said. Instead, we need a collaborative, participative and inclusive paradigm. Now, this is the new stuff for Altrin. Built on love and working through local and global action, connect us with each other as human beings and with nature. And it's this. Society needs to be renewed by making a shift from the negative energy of fear, competition, control and war to the positive energy of faith, love, hope and creativity. Clearly, we need to conceptualise and practice not just learning conferences, but loving learning conferences. Now, for Audrey to come out and embrace that, the sense of, and remember, she's getting close to the end of her life, you know, and this is a very powerful insight in terms of the love. But we need much younger people now to embrace that and explore the implications. I mean, you know, everybody in this room could go further than that, and the key thing is this notion of conceptualise. Okay, so to conceptualise usually just means to understand the principle and the ability to use words in a shared way. To conceptualise something, you know, it's that grasping the principle. And I've been suggesting that we need to go further than just being able to conceptualise, that we need to produce these explanations of our educational influence with these embodied expressions of meaning, of love, hope, justice, joy,
and empathy.
Empathy in particular. That, for those of you who have ever seen the film Nuremberg, there's a Jewish doctor who actually is seeking throughout the whole film to understand the nature of evil. And right at the end of the film, Goering has committed suicide and the people are being convicted. And this guy says to the chief prosecutor that my discovery is that evil is the lack of empathy. So it's that lack of ability to feel with the other. And that is such an important quality. And I'm saying that, and again, you can sometimes I'm mistaken about this, but I do believe that within the Irish culture, you have built up, and I do think that it's come out of 600 years of that colonising and oppressive force, you have developed a real sense of relating to each other with empathy. But you can question, you know, you can say, well, you're mistaken, Jack, but it's something that I've detected. You know, it's over 20 years of coming here and seeing, I've had it in South Africa as well, with this notion of what is called Ubuntu. And if you Google Nelson Mandela and Ubuntu, there's a lovely clip that comes up with Nelson Mandela talking about the quality of community in Ubuntu, and which is roughly translated, I am because we are. And I do think you have that quality of community through conversations here that you could bring into your research. And you could do what Autumn is saying, trying to make those qualities of faith, hope, love and creativity. And the faith isn't just from a religious point of view, it's a form of spirituality which carries that hope in a human existence. Okay, so that I do feel from Autumn is a really important conclusion, if you like, of a lifetime of action research, participatory inquiry. And she's asking us, although she does focus on conceptualising, and I'm saying, well, actually, you've got to be courageous and account for you living these values. That's why I asked you to have that conversation about what might some evidence be that you're actually living the values you claim to hold. Have you got any, has anybody come up with, you came up with that work, your work ethic, and I'm saying,
I think that she does have what I would describe in my thing of action research is that fire in her belly. It's to work with somebody for their good, for the greater good.
Yeah.
And that's basically in action research, that you must not alone do it for yourself, but do it for them, and to take them with you on that journey. And I think she's actually doing it.
Yeah.
Something else.
Spite of derogatory comments.
I don't know if you sense this, but you two are the most raucous in your room.
I know, we've had a good laugh.
Yeah, but honestly, that ability for the humour because it releases what I've been calling that life-affirming energy. You know, between you, as you were talking, it was clear there was a tremendous pleasure, yeah, in the engagement together. And you mustn't lose sight of that, because actually a good sense of humour was Gregory Bateson. He said humour is actually part of social evolution. He said it was an absolutely crucial part of social evolution. And what you were doing together with that liberation of the energy is part of it. And where you were working in the best interests of the other, you know, that's what makes the work ethic, in my language, values-based, which is educational. So if you can actually show with the other that you're actually paying attention through the empathy and responding in a way that helps them to move forward, as I say, that would be a really great contribution. And it's the same with everybody. You know, as you were talking with each other, has anybody else got a sense of, you know, just if you were to say together, well, look, in 6 weeks or a year or whenever, I can hold you accountable to that fundamental value of yours, and we can ask, do you have any evidence that that is what, you know, you've been doing? Is there anybody else that's got, yes?
A question was forming there. Is this almost like the new version of improvement? Like in the original version of Action Research, there was how can I improve my practice? Is it now more how can I live my values through my practice?
Yeah, if you like, it's the development of it. That when I'm saying about improvement, it's actually the values that enable you to judge whether something is improving. So if, for example, we were talking there about your action research, and you were able just to show that in relation to others, you'd worked over time to enable them to realise their best intent. That would be what I was meaning by improvement. If I could demonstrate in, say, 6 months or whenever, that the homepage of Living Theory Researchers included some of your living posters with some details, and I'll go on and show you again what Marilyn has done, and Katrina, because they put their emails, they've done, you know, 3-minute video clips to actually explain to others what it is that they're doing. Now, that would be evidence, if you like, my influence from within this context, that I've been able to fulfill one of my aims, which is, when you talk, that is so fundamental to educational practice. If you can show that you've helped another to realise their best intent with those values, that for me is an original contribution to knowledge. It's a very important, highly original contribution. And now, if I manage to get your living poster to put it with the home page, then again, that would be me trying to be accountable to you for actually saying, right, I'm now trying to live these values as fully as I can, which is to bring your embodied knowledge with your values more fully into the world so others can actually share it and learn from it. Yeah? Is there anything else that you're feeling? Because that one about improvement is crucial. You know, how do we, and it is how do I, but the I, we. I'll just mention this. In today's publication of eJobs, it comes out in June, and it just happened that this morning it was actually published. There's a beautiful article by a South African and an English man, and they both identify like that. One identifies as a black South African educator, the other is a white educator, and they've, over 12 months, worked out conversations where they can ask genuine we questions from different cultural perspectives. So they've come together and shown how over 12 months they've engaged in educational conversations that's allowed, and they've got into the Millennium Goals of UNESCO to try to connect with the global social movement. But this is really, I think, crucial to see, okay, what are your values? What might you work on? What could be evidence? You know, you might, you know, did you come up with anything together in terms of what you were working on that you felt that kind of evidence base or not?
Yeah, so Simon was talking about that he has always had the value that he wants to help people, and for him he was feeling that even though he strives to help people, a lot of his research is often kept in a bubble, and very little of it is shared publicly and things like that. So over the next few months, that's definitely something that he wants to start working on.
Yeah. So we would be looking then, and on your living poster, you could have that as an aim and an intention. Yeah? And literally, if we kept some contact over the next year or 2 years, then we could actually just come back to that And it may change in terms of what it was we were doing, but we could ask, have you made any progress in doing that? So that's really important to take it from the local, which is crucial. It's the bedrock of where you're starting from. The local, getting started, and moving a connection to the global so you can spread the influence on a wider basis. And one of the ways, as I say, I'll show you again, Katerina's poster where she's got her email, she's got, you know, just the image, because it would be great just to see on your living poster, because although I can recognise each one of you, so I would know if I saw you again that we've met, I don't know any of the details that allow me then to say, university, we had this, Dublin City University, in terms of this conference, right, this is what has emerged through your influence, bringing your living posters with your values into that public forum. Is there anything else that anybody, as you were talking, you felt, yeah, this is giving me some understanding of the evidence that the other person might bring to me so that I could show that I was living my values? Is there anything else or not? Anything?
We had a discussion of what evidence could be overall. Could you also say that evidence could be in the types of how you collected your data from people that you're co-researching with, like how you choose to have that dialogue?
Yeah, it could, right? It
Okay,
could.
okay.
But when we talked over lunch, okay, do you mind if I say what was? No. Because this was, I think, counts as really good evidence that in creating a doctorate, you can sometimes do it if you're in a university in two ways. And one is called like publications, which is what I did. Now, over lunch, we were talking about the ability to put your publications together with a commentary that actually threads throughout. And I did a living theory commentary, which connected and showed my learning. It was about 20 years with publications that went on. Now, as we were talking over lunch, it was fascinating in terms of what you were saying to me about the implications of the relationships and the narrative that you were actually hoping to construct, but you weren't sure whether this would be acceptable to your institution. Now, an improvement from my point of view with the evidence would be that you tried to get your publications with a commentary which demonstrated the life in terms of career, because it was focused on careers, wasn't it? Careers advice, over the time that you've been conducting this research with your publications. Now, do you follow? That for me will be superb evidence in terms of your desire to bring into the public domain something that mattered to you.
Yeah.
Now, I agreed about, you know, the data will be one thing, but this is so much deeper and extensive in terms of what you could be asking for in, say, 6 months' time to see if that has been done. Is it becoming clearer about the kind of explanations that you could give, which are evidence-based, but focused on what really matters to you? Because that was interesting, that over lunch, I felt that I really understood what really mattered to you. In this response, you focused on data.
Well, it was just that we were discussing also, because I'm still also, I'm still collecting and I have a longer history, so it's just how would I prove it?
Yeah.
As you come back to that.
Yeah. And that, again, this is so, it's important living theory research that what I was not done in terms of past publications, you use your past stories as data, because as you now create your own living theory in the present, you draw on what you've done in the past. So you never lose it, you don't lose it, but you treat it as data, which you're now moving on and evolving and developing over time. Yeah? Yeah, anything else before I focus on this idea of living poster? Anybody else? Yeah?
Beyond all my questions, sorry. Is there ever a danger that you might be too prescriptive even with yourself about what counts as evidence, so that you decide now this will be the evidence that I have achieved these things, as opposed to leaving it open and seeing what emerges?
The way I think you avoid that, okay, is by making sure that you have a validation group between 3 to 8 peers. Okay. Now, that second criteria that I used, and this is from that guy, Jürgen Habermas, the critical theorist, he said, look, try and get your validation group to ask about improving the comprehensibility. But the second one is, how can I strengthen the evidence base of the justifications I use, to claim that the explanation I offer is valid. Now, to open that up to your validation group actually helps to prevent that closing gap, because your validation group, I think, would be helping you to remain open and go into what further evidence do I need to be able to justify the claim that I'm making. But you're right, it's a danger. Yeah, Marie.
Do you want to say something about actually recognising data, what it is? I'm thinking of Barry's thesis, when he actually realised he had data all around him that had not actually seen as such.
Do you want to say?
No, you come in. I don't want to interrupt.
Whose thesis?
Barry Hyman's.
Oh yes, Barry Hyman. He did this beautiful work. Was it Philosophy for Children? And he was working at the university, it was one of the northeastern universities. And he was a friend of Marie's, and Marie knew that he was stuck, and he hadn't been able to write, and he wasn't getting the kind of support he was hoping to get, from the supervisor. And Marie thought that a conversation with me might help. And we met at a workshop that Marie was organising, and she put us in contact together. And literally within half an hour, I was excited by what he was doing, but I could appreciate that his data was all around him in terms of what he was doing with the kids, his relationships with his workplace. And once he'd opened himself up to that possibility, he really was no longer stuck. He'd been stuck for months and months. And then he wrote this beautiful doctorate. It's actually on the web. But it was from that moment of liberating, from the constraints of feeling that he'd no data or it wasn't sufficient. And it was that kind of conversation, which I was acting basically as a validation, to open things up and see how to strengthen. But it really is important not to be constrained, to remain open, and yet, every one of you, I've got to close it down at some point. You've got to have a structure which is submitted, either as a paper, dissertation, thesis. Yeah. Anything else before I come? No. Because it's a long session, would you just like 5 or 10 minutes break, and then we've got an hour before the end? Should we just have that? Yeah? Okay, just 5 or 10 minutes break, and then we'll come back to the last hour. That's great. Emerging from the conversations today is whether we might, saying you're going over to Vera, Manchester in September, with, I think it's 4 people from here, isn't it? Now, one of the ways is if our conversation can pick up at Manchester, and we look at what you were saying about the spirituality, the religious education. And I was talking about Cunningham, who did his doctorate with me, and he got together last night with the Neary group. Then he's now a prison visitor, and he's pushing me morally further than I feel easy about. Okay, because it's all about, he's working with the murderers and rapists, and I've still got an issue, because Ben has got a beautiful way of recognising the humanity of the other. Okay, no matter what they've done, the humanity of the other, and the correspondences having with Guerra Laidlaw, who was one of the originators of EJOTS, is now actually on that homepage, and the latest correspondence is there. So if we take up, like in September, just some of those values, and others here, I've got my living post on the homepage, then that for me would be evidence of some influence with you, that it's been successful in encouraging you to bring forward your own embodied knowledge and make it public. Now, how you can do this has been put on the web. So this one here, I'll show you how you can access this, but it just says you could create, your question was how do you go about creating a living poster? And here are just some guidelines. 2 to 3 minute video clip, communicating essentials of the context, interest, research patterns, practice and values as the explanatory principles. Creating an attractive A4 poster, sending to the file, so that's it, it's basically that. Now, the way you can access this is to go into my homepage, okay? So you go into the actionresearch.net homepage, down this column on the What's New section to the living posters, this one, living theory posters, these are now being updated. So if you were to actually put these in, like over the next 2 or 3 weeks,
Next 2 weeks.
next 2 weeks, because we're going on to Montreal for this Action Research Network of the Americas conference. And if you had got those into us, we could actually include them on this homepage, where there are over 100 researchers that have got their living posters in, and we could actually bring that to the attention, just like I did with you, with Neary. You know, we can bring up Bernie Sullivan, Catriona, Mary, and Bernard, so that you can actually get onto what it is.
Sorry, which tab did we click on? Here and there.
Yeah, so it's all right. No. I think this is just important to learn how to get to the information. You know, on the left here, you've got the living theory doctorates, master educators' writings. There's my own writings there.
Yeah.
On here, it's what's new. Yeah. So I'll show you. First of all, you go down to living posters there.
Yeah, okay.
Living theory posters, 7th of June.
Yeah.
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 But before I go into that here, which is how to create and share, I'll just point this out. If you go to the What's New section, and if you're doing anything like the BERA conference, then you can go into there, because the first one is what we've done today. There was a living theory gathering in Bath on the 13th of April, and that, I'll just get back into that. So that's into my homepage. Now, you look here, this one. See, this is the 20th and 21st of June, that's this month. At Worcester University, we're presenting on this global perspectives on reimagining education. This one, for the BERA event again. The proposal form, and the deadline now I think is June the 23rd. And this one is for the Collaborative Action Research Network and the Action Learning Action Research Association. These are 2 international networks of researchers at Split in Croatia on Imagine Tomorrow, Practitioner Learning for the Future. Now you click on there and all of the details about how to access the form for actually submitting are there. How to submit an abstract. I think the deadline has got there, it will tell you about June, but all the details about how to submit, if you wanted to do it, are there. And then here, we've got from Montreal on the 26th, 28th of June, and this is a fascinating one about contributing to moving action research to activism with living theory research. It's this idea that if you do what I'm now saying and bring your living posters into this forum internationally, this is a form of activism because you're sharing how you're living your values as fully as possible. And that's all on the What's New section, so you can see what is actually going on, certainly up to October, with the one in Split. The living posters are there, so you just go on to that. Then, if you click on this, how to create and share your living poster, there are details, not to follow as a template, but just some ideas about how you might actually generate your own living poster and then send it in. My email is there. I usually pass those on to Marie, who is then collating onto the homepage. Okay?
Can I just say, it's not as difficult as an academic poster. And good enough done is much better than perfect never finished. So if it takes you more than time it takes, it's actually finding images that you really like that communicates. So whatever you want to send, they'll be great. If I don't have anything that's... How can we make it public?
I've glanced through Cotton and they're not, I don't find them, they're quite skillful in terms of the writing, so the writing is slightly different to that's what I've done my doctoral dissertation in, so you have to be quite a skilled writer to do.
Well, let's just see.
I suspect that you might need to be a very skilled writer to do a action research.
Oh,
I'm a bit nervous looking at that, so you're doing very
well, this is so difficult, isn't it? Because actually, when you start with the Action Reflection Planner, the Living Theory Planner, yeah? Actually, that is, what's your concern? When we've been through this, okay, imagine what to do about it. choose one to act on. As you're acting, what data will you need to make a judgment? Then produce an evaluation. Yeah? Now, that process, most people, when I start, can actually follow it. I don't even use research. I don't even use the word to start. You know, I just say, well, what are you doing in your practice? What are you actually doing? You want to improve? Do you think this process might help you? Yeah? Now, when you talk about becoming skillful, you do become more skillful. For example, when you move on from the beginning, in 8 volumes of what's called Passion Professional Practice, and again, I can send you the URLs. I'll do this when I send the note round to everybody. They're just beginning researchers in Canada that got their writings further than just beginning, but not up to the point of a master's. Yeah? Then the next one comes with master's units, a dissertation, a doctoral thesis. So the skill, if you look at this one, if you like, from Maureen. So there she is. Now, yeah? Now actually, I don't think there will be anything that you would not be able to just put in terms of what it is you're interested in. And it will be just getting, you see, because I recognise, you from today, this thing, if I have your, like, there's no mistaking, that's Maureen's name. You know, so we've got Maureen, I know who she is, yes? But I also now know something about the research she's doing. Now that's all that's really needed, it's just getting, it's like with the getting started. It's just, it really is, it's just saying, well, you know, what might other people be interested in terms of what you're doing? Are you okay with that?
Yes, I do, and I think, you know, it looks, it's a slightly different way of looking at writing, isn't it? You know, it's just, it's mindset, it's just shifting it in a different mindset.
Do you know, it really is, and if you do this work, the big shift of the mindset is also into the use of this digital visual data. That's the biggest one, because universities around the world are just used to printed text. Now, I was part of a 4-person Senate committee in 2004, and we got the university regulations changed to allow the submission of the e-data, which was the visual. And mine was the first student, who's called Mary Hartog, and she was the first one to use the digital visual data in the doctorate. And many have done since then. But that is the biggest mindset, because your tutors will usually only be used to publishing in the traditional academic journal, which is all print-based. And it's quite difficult to show them the limitations in printed text. Now, it's actually very easy when you show, I did it in China. Moira Nabler was there over 6 years voluntary service. It was a 1-minute video clip of her at the end of a lesson going to her students. And it was unmistakable, the kind of quality of connection that she had. You know, as she actually congratulated one of the students on asking her a question and resisting the imposition of something. In China, it was unusual for students to question the teacher. And there was Moira going, and there was an openness and an energy about her, but on this 1-minute video clip. Yeah, the other one has a mindset. There's a beautiful thesis from a nurse called Marion Naidu. And Marion's thesis was on a passion for compassion. And the examiners actually looked at, and it was only a brief, I think it was only a 3-minute video clip, of an Alzheimer's patient with the carer. And the carer had been married to the Alzheimer's patient for 50 years. And there was this amazing way the woman who's got Alzheimer's, you thought she was actually comatose. She was sitting behind her husband. And the husband suddenly started, because the researcher had asked if he would just outline what he does as a carer. And he started to talk about all the work he did as a carer. And suddenly, Marion, who was also the name of the researcher, but Marion from behind, suddenly came from what you'd take to be comatose. She started to move, and she sat up. And she listened to him very attentively as he talked about all the things he did for her. And then she went, just like that, which was communicating. You know, my big-headed husband is communicating everything that he does for me. So from comatose, you know, and the examiners got it. They understood this passion for compassion was being expressed within that very brief video clip, and moving from a comatose position to something which was beautiful to see in terms of recognition that this person was understanding. Am I making sense here? That no amount of text can communicate, but actually to see that happening in the here and now, it actually convinced the examiners of the meaning of a passion for compassion. So I think you've already got the embodied knowledge, but it is, as you say, it's not an easy mind shift. Yeah. Are you okay with this in terms of that idea that somebody might produce this living poster, which will just introduce you, just picture some of the ideas so we can actually start to put that in. A practitioner researcher who met at DCU, and this is where we are. Anyway, that's where I got to in terms of my understanding of where I got to with my research. Are there any other things you'd like, anything else now? Because I really do want to finish with if there are any issues or insights you would like to share, I'll turn you all into, yes. Sorry, yes.
What would you look for if you're creating your own validation group?
Well, what I used to look for was between 3 to 8 people.
Yeah.
And there were usually peers, okay, of people who actually understood something of me in my research. But I would always include, there was one guy at the university I got on really well with, but he was a positivist scientist. He was called Jim Harvey, and there was no way that he would comprehend developing his own living theory. But I always used to involve him. Another one was Bill Scott, who was very helpful in terms of raising critical issues. So I'd always try to involve somebody within the validation who was not either familiar or supportive of the perspective. And they always used to give interesting...
So diversity, and also include those that you would, from the outset, think were really kind of...
hostile.
Hostile.
Yeah. And when you find that you can genuinely meet the criticisms of people that you've included, and you feel, they're going to be a bit hostile to the perspective. And that is what has been helpful to strengthen throughout my own research. And I always remember in 1987, I got another note from the university, after once sacking me in 74, 75. It said, "Your activities and writings are a challenge to the present and proper organisation of the university, and not consistent with the duties you're expected to pursue as a lecturer in education." Right? Now, that again, it's almost like a validation. I took that as great validation of what I was doing. The fact that I was being seen as a challenge to the present.
As a disturbance.
Yeah, but it felt really right because
you were trying to change.
I was trying to, and it was recognised. And I'll never forget that. Again, it's university solicited.
And how often would you set up to have that validation?
Oh, this is rather important. I don't think you shouldn't go too long before you actually produce a draft explanation. So you don't allow it to go on, I would say, longer than 6 weeks. Otherwise, you suffer from what's called data overload. Whereas when you produce your evaluation or explanation, first one, you can use that as data for the next one, how you're going to strengthen it. Now, I used to hold ones for master's units, it was about every 6 weeks. So for a 13-week module, I used to start in September, and the teacher or the practitioner researchers would have their handed-in module by the end of February. So between starting in September and the end of February, I used to get 2 validation groups in, so they could actually try out their initial explanations and then their final draft, and then strengthen and submit. But I definitely wouldn't allow it to go longer than that, before you've produced this draft explanation of your influence, drawing in some of your data.
Would it help to actually explain to people that quite often that first draft is where you come to an understanding yourself, the writerly, to the reader?
Yeah, I think so. I've got, all of the PhD students in particular, but also the master's groups, without exception, they all thought that they had finished their dissertational thesis. Right? So they handed me something, which was actually what I learned to call the first complete writerly draft. And the very first draft that you produce is actually clarifying for yourself the meanings, okay, as a writerly draft. But then, right at the end of the first writerly draft, you find you're getting clearer about your values and what this is about. And then, what you've got to do is to bring to the foreground in the framing what you have clarified, so it becomes a readerly text. You introduce your reader to what it is this writing is about, and you give him some indication of the organisation of the final draft. Does this make sense? And it happens in all cases. The very first thing, and you think you're finished because you're clear. And actually, what you then need to do is to recognise that is your very first writerly draft. And that it's not difficult, but it's a disciplined process to think, I've now got, am I communicating what I'm clear about to my reader? Because clarifying it for yourself in your initial writing is not the same as getting a readerly draft out. It's like the paper you're producing for a journal. So don't think, I know it's always sometimes disappointing about people thinking they're giving me their final thesis for submission. And I always try to warn them that, well, the first draft you give me and you think it's complete, ready for submission, actually what you've done is clarified what your thesis is for yourself. And then we now need to look at the ending, bring that to the beginning, give it a framing, so your reader understands the significance of what you've done. Yeah. Anything else? Are we okay? Just make sure, because I wouldn't like to go and feel, that I haven't actually covered. If there is anything that you're feeling, no, I'd like a bit more on this, or just give that a bit of thought. Would you mind if you just talk to your partner, just for, as I said, that 5 minutes, and just see if you feel, has everything that you feel that you need actually been covered? Or can I find for anything else that you're feeling, this might be helpful? Okay, just 5 minutes.